Welcome. In this story, you'll follow the ancient Norse gods from the fiery cataclysm of Ragnarök to the quiet rebirth of a new world, and find hope rising from the ashes. But before we begin, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe for more relaxing stories. I'd also love to know where you're from and what time it is for you. Now, let's begin. In the deep hush before the first twilight of Ragnarök, all the 9 worlds seemed to hold their breath. Ancient watchers perched at the edges of reality felt the stirrings of fate. In the silent chambers of Asgard, tapestries woven with gold thread depicted the epic journeys of the Aesir, those mighty gods who had shaped the destinies of worlds for countless ages. But woven into each depiction, if one looked close enough, were the subtle, eerie shapes of wolves chasing the heavenly orbs and serpents curling through invisible cracks, unavoidable omens hidden among the triumphant scenes of Odin's victories. All-Father Odin stood on Hlidskjalf, his high seat, gazing across realms. Here, at the pinnacle of his mighty hall in Asgard, Odin could peer into Midgard, Jotunheim, Muspelheim, Niflheim, and even glimpses of Hel's domain. His single eye, sacrificed at Mimir's well for wisdom, burned with a quiet intensity as it swept over the cosmos. He sensed it, a tremor in the underlying fabric of existence. Though the worlds carried on as if life were normal, an ominous pulse echoed through Yggdrasil's roots. The great world tree groaned with some concealed weight, its cosmic branches quivering. Beneath him, in Valhalla's training grounds, the Einherjar, mortal warriors chosen by the Valkyries for their valor, sparred relentlessly, shields ringing and swords clashing. They believed they were preparing for an eventual war, as they did each day. But Odin knew the hour was drawing close in a way they could scarcely imagine. Meanwhile, Balder, fairest and most radiant of the gods, strolled in a distant garden that glistened with the remains of morning dew. Birds sang, and the sun's rays cascaded through the boughs of ancient trees. Balder's laughter was a gentle melody that warmed every corner of Asgard. Yet of late, dark shadows had stolen across his dreams at night, robbing him of rest. Strange nightmares haunted him, images of his own demise, though in waking hours none could harm him, or so everyone believed. Balder was a fulcrum of peace among the gods, an embodiment of everything bright, and the notion that harm could befall him seemed absurd. But fate, once awakened, is not easily denied. On this day, as the morning light filtered through the graceful columns of Asgard's grand architecture, an undercurrent of dread ran beneath the bright veneer. Odin's 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, circled overhead, cawing in agitation. From that high seat, Odin shut his eye, straining to see beyond the swirl of prophecy, beyond the half-whispered secrets gleaned from Mimir's well. Fimbulwinter, the monstrous wolves, the flaming sword of Surtur. All these flickered in his mind, but in that moment, one vision glowed with particular clarity, the radiant face of Balder, contorted in terror. Even as daylight poured into the halls and the melodies of laughter still echoed, a funeral hush seemed poised to drop over Asgard. In the subtle weave of the cosmic tapestry, threads had begun to tighten. And so, in the hush of this prologue, the seeds of Ragnarök were already germinating. It was only a matter of time before they would burst into full, terrible bloom. Far away, in the land of mortals, frost giants stirred. In Hel's dark domain, half-shrouded souls twitched restlessly, and in a hidden cleft of rock, beneath the unyielding earth, a cunning god, chained for his betrayals, tried to free himself. Yet for now, Asgard stood as it always had. Proud spires reaching the sky, shining walls unbreached. The question that lingered, unspoken on every tongue was, how long until those walls crumble? Chapter 1. Balder's Dreams and the Seeds of Doom. Balder woke with a jolt, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. The bedchamber in Asgard was still cloaked in pre-dawn shadows, and he found himself trembling. A cold sweat clung to his brow. For a moment he couldn't recall the details of his nightmare, only a swirling sense of dread. Then, piece by piece, it came back to him. The monstrous jaws of a wolf, bright red with blood, the crashing sound of 1,000 spears shattering, the howling of a wind so cold it seemed to slice into the marrow of his bones. And at the center of it all, his own reflection, eyes wide in terror as the light faded from them. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart's wild hammering. It was said that Balder could not be harmed by any threat in the 9 worlds, for Frigg, his mother, had exacted oaths from nearly all creatures, metals, and plants never to wound her beloved son. Yet, in the dream, he had felt pain, searing and real, like the thrust of a hidden blade. Feeling a chill, he rose and paced to the balcony. Beyond lay the golden spires of Asgard, half lost in a violet haze of early morning. He drew a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air. So often he would hear others speak of him as the Shining One, the god of the gentle day, or simply the invulnerable. But the man who stood at that balcony, shoulders tense, was neither shining nor invulnerable in that moment. From across the courtyard, a tall figure emerged, Thor, hammer in hand, finishing his own morning routine. The Thunderer looked up, caught Balder's gaze, and offered a grin that might have lit up a smaller realm. Thor's voice, always boisterous, boomed across the yard. "Awake already, brother? The day is young." Balder lifted a hand in greeting, forcing a smile. "I find little peace in slumber," he replied. Thor's brow furrowed, for Balder usually kept a calm mirth about him. Yet the thunder god did not pry, letting the moment pass as he went to join the Einherjar in Valhalla's courtyards. Concern gnawed at Balder. He wondered if he should speak to Odin. Did Odin not dream too of cryptic fates? Did the Allfather's sagacity not unravel the secrets that burdened lesser gods? At times Balder hesitated, knowing that bringing up dark portents might weigh heavily on Odin, who bore the entire cosmos on his shoulders. Yet the fear that lurked at the edges of Balder's awareness was too potent to ignore. Resolve firming within him, Balder dressed quickly in a robe of simple white. He rarely favored the ostentatious garments that other gods wore, and made his way through corridors of polished marble. Columns soared overhead, carved into shapes of curling serpents and triumphant warriors, each telling fragments of Asgard's storied past. The hush of early morning gave the palace an almost sacred air. Valkyries, silent as statues, patrolled with lances in hand. In the hall of the high seat, he found Odin bent over a table strewn with ancient parchments and runic stones. Ravens perched on either side of him, turning their heads with keen interest. Odin did not look up immediately. It seemed he was immersed in some oracular puzzle, gleaning knowledge from cryptic markings. When Balder cleared his throat, the Allfather finally raised his single eye. "Balder, my son," he said softly, "your face bears more shadows than I am used to seeing." Balder nodded, seating himself across from Odin. He recounted the dream, the ravenous wolf, the savage chill, the sense of a fatal blow. Odin listened without interruption, though a muscle in his jaw twitched at the mention of the wolf's gory maw. When Balder finished, silence settled between them. The ravens stirred uneasily. At length Odin spoke, his voice low. "Dreams can be warnings or illusions or a twisting of both. Yet your visions are not random trifles, Balder. You have been touched by prophecy before, the tapestry of fate. It trembles, and in that trembling we see glimpses." He gestured to his runic stones. "I have searched for guidance as well. Dark times are coming, and you—" Balder leaned in, breath caught in his throat. He expected consolation, a reassurance that no mortal or beast could truly harm him. Instead, Odin's eye narrowed with a haunted intensity. Your mother tried to shield you from everything, but fate is cunning. It finds the smallest thread left unguarded. A cold coil of dread wrapped around Baldur's stomach, but he forced a calm smile. Then I must trust in what safety I do have. Odin's gaze darted to the ravens. Yes, trust. But also remain vigilant. Should these nightmares persist, you must tell me. We may yet avert the worst. Then, as if trying to lighten the moment, Odin added, Go. Enjoy the day. Greet your friends. Fear is an unwelcome guest in our halls, as I've often said. Baldur rose. He bowed to Odin, though an unspoken tension lingered. He left the hall with footsteps that felt heavier than they had been an hour before. Something unspoken lay behind Odin's words, some deeper knowledge that the All-Father dared not share completely. The shadows in Baldur's dreams had begun to stir the shadowy corners of Asgard's great palace. To pass the time, Baldur made his way to a sunlit courtyard where he often reveled in the simple act of breathing fresh air and letting the day's warmth bathe his skin. Frigg, his mother, was already there. She was tending to a bed of flowers that bloomed bright as jewels. Her gentle face lit up at her son's approach, yet even she sensed his unease. A mother's intuition runs deeper than any vow of cosmic protection. They spoke quietly about the previous evening's feast, the happenings among the mortals below, and small details that usually brought a smile. But beneath their exchange lurked the knowledge that Baldur's dreams were turning darker and that neither mother nor son could dispel them with casual words. Before long, other gods began to stir. Freyr and Freya, children of the Vanir, strolled by, discussing matters of harvest and love, their realm of expertise. Idun passed, carrying her golden apples that bestowed youth upon the Aesir. Yet every so often, glances would dart toward Baldur as if they sensed an invisible cloud. Some tried to greet him with hearty cheer, but his replies carried a distracted air. And so the seeds of doom remained, quietly taking root. No one realized these seeds would blossom into the cataclysm known as Ragnarok. In Asgard's still beautiful morning, it seemed unthinkable that such splendor could be undone. However, fate is rarely turned aside by beauty or by confidence alone. Already an unerring strand in the tapestry was guiding events toward a day none would escape. Chapter 2. The Death of Baldur. The day it happened, Asgard was brimming with merriment. Festive banners soared from golden spires, while the laughter of gods and Einherjar alike echoed through long halls. Queen Frigg herself presided over archery contests and friendly bouts of combat with wooden practice swords. Wine and mead flowed freely, a celebration of peace long preserved in the realm. Even the occasional lightning-laced jest of Thor, who roamed among the crowd, drew roars of laughter. Amid the revelry, Baldur stood quietly near a flowering tree, a subtle worry lines crossing his brow. He had been coaxed into joining a ceremonial game that had become tradition. The gods would lob all manner of weapons and objects at Baldur, testing the vow Frigg had extracted from everything in creation never to harm him. Swords clanged harmlessly against his chestplate, spears veered off course, stones turned mid-flight and bounced away. This spectacle brought uproarious applause, for it demonstrated that Baldur's gift, indeed the entire realm's sense of security, remained intact. Loki, standing in the shadows at the periphery of the crowd, watched with narrowed eyes. The shapeshifter, known for his cunning, had been strangely quiet these last days. His lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile as he observed the game's progression. Each failed attempt to wound Baldur seemed to amuse him more than it should. Drawn by curiosity, Frigg approached Loki and asked in a genial tone, "Do you wish to join the fun, Loki? Everyone is free to test Baldur's invulnerability. Of course, you know the result will be the same. He cannot be harmed." Loki bowed with a theatrical flourish. "I would love to, dear Frigg, but I worry that anything I throw will add little novelty. Unless, perhaps—" He trailed off, feigning a pensive look. Frigg, growing a bit uneasy, tilted her head. Loki continued, "Is there truly nothing in all the 9 worlds that might wound your beloved son?" Frigg smiled, though her eyes were watchful. "I have asked every creature, every stone, every weapon, from the roots of Yggdrasil to the edges of the cosmos, to swear an oath not to harm my son. I have not neglected even the worms beneath the earth. Balder is safe." She hesitated. "Well, except for something so young and harmless I found it laughable to ask. A sprig of mistletoe newly sprouted on an old oak. I did not make it swear, for how could such a tender plant be of any danger?" Loki's eyes gleamed a fraction. "Indeed, how could it?" he said with a soft chuckle. Then he slipped away, leaving Frigg with a slight chill. Moments later, among the throng of celebrants, Loki sidled up to the blind god Hörder, who stood apart, listening to the festivities, with an expression of yearning. Hörder, though powerful, could not join in the spectacle of hurling objects at Balder because he could not see to aim. Loki, all genial sympathy, gently placed a slender branch in Hörder's hands. "Here, friend," Loki murmured, "a chance to participate. I shall guide your arm so that you too can share in the fun." Hörder's face brightened at the kindness. He had felt excluded from the merriment for too long. "You are most kind," he said. "But what is this I hold? A branch? Surely it cannot pierce armor?" "Just a harmless twig of mistletoe," Loki replied, stepping behind Hörder to guide his aim. "No threat at all. Come, join in the spirit of the celebration." At that moment, Balder was engaged with Tyr in conversation, oblivious to Loki's scheme. The crowd around him was boisterous, roaring in laughter at each object that flew. The noise was deafening. Then everything seemed to slow as Hörder, guided by Loki, hurled the slender twig toward Balder. It whirled through the air as a tiny spear, silent and unremarkable, lost momentarily in the swirl of the festival. But Balder felt the impact with sudden, shocking clarity. The twig struck him in the chest. He staggered, eyes wide with disbelief and pain. A hush fell, as though the very air was snatched away. Balder's face twisted, confusion mingled with anguish. Then he collapsed, a trembling hand reaching for the slender branch that had become a fatal dart. Cries erupted. Gods rushed forward, but it was too late. Where axes and spears had failed, this small piece of overlooked greenery found its mark. Frigg's scream ripped through the hush as she watched her beloved son sink to the ground. Thor roared, hurling Mjolnir in a desperate attempt to shatter the twig, but the damage was done. Balder's life bled away before anyone could reach him. A stunned circle formed around the fallen god. Loki stood at the edge, face impassive. Hörder, realizing what had happened, dropped to his knees in horror. He turned blindly, tears streaking his cheeks, reaching out for Balder, but unable to do anything. The hush was deafening. Then came the wails. Frigg knelt, cradling Balder's head in her arms, her face a mask of shock and despair. Odin arrived, the expression on his own features a complicated mosaic of fury, heartbreak, and grim recognition. He who had foreseen so many ends had not fully believed this day would come so swiftly. Above, the sky dimmed unnaturally, as if the cosmos itself mourned. Even the ravens cawed in alarm. The festivities were forgotten, wine spilled, instruments clattered to the ground. In the midst of this cacophony, Balder's final breath slipped away, leaving the beloved god still and silent. That day was a turning point in Asgard, for not only was Balder lost, but the sense of invulnerability that had once reassured the gods shattered like glass. The hearts of all who witnessed his death seized with a new terror. If Balder, brightest among them, could be struck down, who was safe? And as the watchers from across realms listened to Frigg's grieving sobs, a chill wind seemed to whisper that this was only the beginning of something far darker, a prophecy set into unstoppable motion. In the crowd's stunned hush, they saw Loki vanish, slipping away in the confusion. Whether his expression was triumphant or haunted, none could say for sure. But the seeds of doom he had cultivated had blossomed into tragedy. Balder the Beautiful was dead. Chapter 3. The Fimbul Winter Descends. In the bleak days following Balder's death, all of Asgard was draped in a quiet pall. Gone were the cheers and light-hearted contests. The shock of losing their brightest god in so sudden and inexplicable a manner settled like hoarfrost upon the hearts of the Aesir. Frigg retreated to her private chambers, where her sobs echoed through the lofty corridors. Odin was seen pacing the palace grounds more often than usual, conferring anxiously with his ravens. Thor's laughter vanished, replaced by a subdued watchfulness. As winter crept over Midgard, nobody suspected how deep or long it would become, until the first dreadful signs emerged. A sudden chill drenched the mortal realm, snuffing out harvests and blanketing once lush fields in an endless, bitter freeze. With it came a stillness that gripped every farm and village. Winds cut like knives, howling over rooftops and ripping away the last vestiges of warmth. Asgard, perched high above, was not immune to the descending gloom. Though the halls remained shining, frost crystals formed in corners once warmed by Balder's presence. Fires burned in every hearth, but a sense of cosmic cold filtered in nonetheless. Many believed it was Frigg's boundless sorrow that caused the warmth to drain from the realm. Others, more attuned to prophecy, whispered that the final cycle had already begun. Down in Midgard, rumors spread in mortal settlements of the never-ending frost. People huddled in huts made of logs and stone in desperate attempts to keep out the gnawing chill. The sun rose later each morning and sank earlier in the afternoon, as though frightened off by the biting skies. By the time a new year rolled around, no thaw arrived. Rivers remained locked beneath thick ice, and farmland turned to wasteland. Livestock perished in droves, starving wolves prowled the edges of villages, sometimes attacking humans out of sheer desperation. In Asgard's feasting hall, more than a few gods openly questioned Odin. "When will this relent?" they asked. "Surely we have faced harsh winters before. Thor's storms are fearsome, but none have lasted this long." Odin, haunted, would only reply, "A change is upon us. The old patterns do not hold." In the mortal realm, violence erupted. Once friendly neighbors fought over firewood or scraps of food. With each passing month, chaos deepened. Kingly halls that had once offered hospitality fell into ruin as their larders emptied. Some turned to raiding, clad in ragged furs and desperate for anything edible. Even the most peaceful souls, starved beyond reason, found themselves wielding spears against fellow humans. The second year arrived, and still no sign of spring. Across the 9 worlds, other signs multiplied. In Jotunheim, the frost giants reveled in the plunging temperatures, beating drums that echoed across glaciers. In Hell, the realm of the dead, restive spirits stirred, drawn by a cosmic tension. In the heart of Asgard, Odin's concern was profound. Night after night he sent Hugin and Munin to scout the realms, bringing back glimpses of growing despair. He conferred in secret with the Norns, weavers of fate, but they offered no comfort. Instead, they confirmed what he already dreaded. This unrelenting cold heralded the approach of Ragnarok. When Thor learned of this from Odin, his anger flared. Stamping through the palace halls, Mjolnir crackling in his grip, he bellowed, "Then let me strike down every frost giant, every malicious force that dares to bring this ruin upon Midgard." Sparks flashed in his eyes, a mix of grief and rage. But Odin placed a restraining hand on his son's shoulder. The Fimbulwinter is part of the great tapestry. A war on giants would only hasten the final confrontation. We must prepare, gather our strength, call our allies. We cannot shatter fate with brute force. Thor's expression smoldered, yet something in Odin's tired gaze silenced further protest. Thor turned away, thunder rumbling faintly as he walked. Meanwhile, in a remote Midgard village half buried in snowdrifts, an old farmer named Arna found himself caring for an orphaned boy, Knut, whose parents had perished in the cold. Arna had little food, little warmth to spare, but pity compelled him. Together they survived day to day, scrounging meager turnips from a frost-bitten cellar. Wolves circled the edges of the village, their eyes glowing in the perpetual twilight. One storm-lashed night, a band of desperate men, faces gaunt from hunger, arrived with clubs and knives, demanding Arna's stash of food. Arna clutched Knut close, trembling. The men threatened violence, and though no one would have believed it, Arna, fueled by desperation and love for the boy, chased them off with a fiery brand. Such stories proliferated across Midgard. Where once generosity thrived, now fear reigned. Even among the devout who prayed ceaselessly to the gods, no respite came. The Eddas recounted a time when the gods had personally intervened in mortal strife, but now the heavens seemed silent, consumed by their own dread. In Asgard, none felt Baldur's loss more keenly than Frigg. She wandered forlorn among the palace's stone archways, often stopping at the dais where Baldur once sat during feasts, or gazing at paintings that depicted her son in bright colors. A mother's tears fell endlessly, as though each day's sorrow matched the ceaseless winter outside. Sometimes, in her quieter moments, she heard a faint echo, like Baldur's laughter drifting through the corridors. She would whirl around, heart pounding, only to find an empty alcove. The illusions left her more shattered than before. Rumors spread that Frigg, in her despair, visited darker corners of the cosmos in an attempt to bargain for Baldur's return. She tried to contact Hel, whose domain held the souls of the dead. But Hel's realm had grown uneasy. The forces of chaos were already stirring there. Frigg returned from these secret journeys with fresh tears and no success. By the close of the third year, Fimbulwinter showed no sign of breaking. Indeed, it felt as if the world could not remember what warmth even was. Snow fell perpetually, ice thickened on every shore, mists of frozen breath enshrouded entire forests. Midgard's population dwindled drastically from famine, cold, and violence. Tales of cannibalism in distant lands circulated among horrified survivors. In Asgard, a hush gripped the shining halls as the gods waited, uncertain how to combat a cosmic winter that defied all reason. The realization settled like a lead weight on every mind. Baldur's death had broken something fundamental, and this endless freeze was but one step along the road to the greater doom. And so, as the final hours of the third year ticked away, a new fear took root in all hearts, because the legends were clear. When Fimbulwinter ended, far darker things would follow. The time for sorrow was coming to an end, replaced by a stark urgency to prepare. For if they could not endure the cold, how would they face the conflagration that loomed on the horizon? Chapter 4. Wolves of Night, Skjöll and Hati. No one saw them at first, those two colossal wolves. Skjöll and Hati had long prowled the skies, chasing the sun and moon with supernatural tenacity. To mortals, they were distant legends, spoken of in hushed campfire stories. Even many gods treated them like half-forgotten threats, beasts that roam the celestial plain, rumored to devour the shining orbs at the end of time. But as Fimbulwinter's chill gripped the 9 worlds, the wolves grew emboldened. Daylight grew paler and shorter, and the sun goddess, once robust in her daily passage, found her light flickering. Skjöll, whose name meant treachery, nipped ever closer to the sun's fiery heels, salivating at the promise of final victory. Hati, or hate, did the same with the moon, which waned in the eternal cold. The atmosphere across Midgard shifted as an uneasy twilight settled, lingering long after day's last light. Occasionally, watchers atop tall watchtowers claimed they glimpsed impossibly large silhouettes crossing the horizon. Whispers abounded. The wolves are nearing their prey. The end can't be far. Sometime after the bleak second year of Fimbul winter, Odin convened a secret council within a remote chamber of Asgard's palace. Around a circular table sat Thor, Freyr, Freya, Tyr, and Heimdall, each bearing etched lines of worry. Outside, snow blanketed even the valiant heights of Asgard's walls. Odin's voice was grave. Baldur's death has heralded the unstoppable. We face the prophecy. The wolves, Skuld and Hati, are drawing near. Should they succeed in devouring the sun and moon, darkness will fall across all realms. I have seen fleeting visions in the runes, Skuld's jaws snapping shut, Hati swallowing pale moonlight. Once that happens, there will be no turning back. Heimdall gripped his horn Gjallarhorn with white knuckles. I stand watch at the Bifrost. I shall sound the alarm the moment I see them near Asgard. But if they devour the sun and moon first, the final battle will be upon us before we can even muster our defenses. Thor struck the table with his fist, rattling goblets. Then we must meet those beasts in battle before they succeed. I will stand upon the highest peak and hurl Mjolnir at the fiends. Let them feel the wrath of thunder. Odin shook his head. Your bravery is unmatched, my son, but the tapestry of fate is tightly woven. We cannot avert Ragnarok by slaying the harbingers alone. We must prepare for the inevitable war to come. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, stared solemnly. Still, we can try to buy time. If the sun and moon are devoured too soon, we lose our advantage of sight and morale. That evening, as the council broke, each deity departed with a burdensome sense of inevitability. They would do what they could to hold back the cosmic wolves, but the threads of prophecy felt inexorably tight around their throats. Skuld was a hulking silhouette that cast a massive shadow even in the dim winter light. His coat was as black as the inside of a well, his eyes burning embers. As he sprinted across the horizon, his spine arched like a bow, each leap spanning leagues of sky. Beneath him, mortals witnessed fleeting eclipses, a ghastly shape blotting out the sun's faint radiance. The sun goddess, now weakened by the prolonged cold and the draining power of dread, fled faster than ever before. Yet Skuld closed the gap day by day. She felt the hot rush of the wolf's breath on her chariot, smelled the tang of his starved fury. In the mortal realm, the day's light grew weaker still, prompting further desperation. Entire villages concluded that the end of the sun was upon them and turned to savage acts to appease whatever spirits they believed might spare them. Some offered sacrifices, sometimes even human sacrifices, to placate the wolves. Yet no amount of pleading seemed to halt the unstoppable chase overhead. Meanwhile, Hati prowled the night sky, chasing the moon's gentle glow. He was said to be slightly smaller than Skuld, but no less vicious. With each passing night, the moon's cycle seemed erratic, as though terror caused it to wane prematurely. Astronomers in Midgard couldn't chart its course accurately, noting that sometimes it seemed to vanish for nights on end, before appearing again like a startled, half-shrouded face. When the moon goddess, pale and luminous, glanced behind her, she could almost see the gleaming fangs of Hati snapping at her. If ever she paused, paralyzed by fear, his savage roar forced her onward. In the great cosmic tree Yggdrasil, the tension was palpable. Squirrels and eagles that once roamed its branches sensed an otherworldly hush. The bark of the tree turned brittle in spots, as if sorrow had taken hold. In Asgard, frost coated the shimmering walls so thickly that one could carve shapes in the ice. The gods felt an emptiness as day after day passed, with the sun barely casting a faint silverish glimmer, and by night the moon sometimes failed to appear at all, plunging the realm into unnerving darkness. Humans on Midgard, in turn, labored in near constant gloom. Northern lights occasionally flickered in the sky, strange and ominous, as if the spirits themselves were panicked. Driven by desperation, Thor eventually decided he could no longer wait. Gathering his chariot pulled by two goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, he ascended to the highest peak in Midgard. From there he scanned the horizon. On a day so dim that it resembled twilight, he spotted Skjöld's dark form loping toward a faint orb. Summoning the storm, Thor hurled Mjolnir with all his might. The hammer streaked across the sky like a lightning bolt. Yet Skjöld, as if guided by the unstoppable momentum of fate, twisted aside. Mjolnir's lightning only singed the wolf's fur. The beast continued its relentless sprint, barely slowed. Thor snarled, calling down thunder that shook the mountains, but Skjöld paid no heed. With a final echoing roar, the wolf vanished into thick swirling clouds, chasing the sun across the heavens. Thor collapsed to one knee, a rare show of despair. Though mighty, even he could not intercept destiny. Word of Thor's failed attempt reached Asgard swiftly. If the thunder god could not halt Skjöld, who could? In hushed gatherings, the god spoke of the devouring that was sure to come. None wanted to state it openly, but all were sure it was only a matter of time before those ravenous jaws closed upon sun or moon, or both. For a while longer, the chase continued. Some days the sun managed to streak a bit higher in the sky, eluding Skjöld's snapping teeth. Some nights the moon reappeared, weaving a hasty arc away from Hati. Yet the spaces between sightings grew shorter. The doomsday hush that blanketed the cosmos thickened, as if every living creature was holding its breath, awaiting a final ghastly snap. Darkness hovered on the cusp of each horizon, pressing in closer. And in that darkness, one could almost hear the panting of cosmic wolves, echoed by the feral snarls of Fenrir's distant kin. One afternoon in Asgard, Odin stood atop the palace walls, watching the sun's feeble light drift across the sky. A single tear traced its path down his weathered cheek. He said nothing, for nothing needed to be said. The hour was nearly at hand. Chapter 5. Portents and Roosters' Calls. A hush gripped the nine worlds as the dreaded day approached. It was not the hush of simple silence, but of a universe poised on the brink of upheaval. In Asgard, tensions ran high. Each god felt the approach of cataclysm in the marrow of their bones. Signs multiplied across all realms. Rivers boiled in Jotunheim, not from heat but from some unnatural turbulence beneath the ice. In Alfheim, the elves murmured of a dimming light that sapped the color from their once luminous forests. Muspelheim's fiery heart seemed to blaze higher than ever, sparks flying into the skies in bright arcs. And in Niflheim, glaciers cracked with gunshot-like echoes, revealing ominous crevasses. Mortals found themselves prey to nightmares of blood-soaked suns and blackened moons. No matter how tightly they barricaded their huts or prayed at their altars, the same nightmares haunted them in the long sub-zero nights. Some believed they glimpsed apparitions, ghostly figures chanting songs in unknown tongues, perhaps foretelling the grand battle to come. Among the gods, these portents evoked memories of old prophecies recounted in the stanzas of the Voluspa. Passages about roosters crowing, Garmr howling, and the final muster of giants now seemed no mere poetry, but living truth. He was no ordinary bird. Gullinkambi, golden comb, roosted atop the halls of Valhalla, rarely noticed by mortals, but always revered by the Einherjar. His gleaming feathers caught the faint sunlight whenever it broke through the clouds, illuminating him with an otherworldly glow. One morning, amid a dawn so pale it was almost indistinguishable from night, Gullinkambi began to crow. Not a mere barnyard sound, but a clarion call that resonated across Asgard. The cry was golden thunder, echoing off pillars and ramparts, waking every god, every warrior of Valhalla from uneasy slumber. Those who heard it were seized by a sudden jolt of adrenaline. The Einherjar grasped their swords and shields, hearts pounding. They knew this was no random sound, but a clarion. The time of reckoning was near. Odin stood on a high balcony, listening. A mixture of grim acceptance and sorrow played across his features. He turned to his ravens, who launched themselves into the sky, cawing and beating their wings. Below, the hushed confusion of Asgard's inhabitants gave way to murmurs of alarm. Why had Gullinkambi sounded now, if not to herald the final stand? Deep within the ice-swept crags of Jotunheim, the frost giants roused from centuries of stony slumber. Fjalar, the rust-red rooster, took his place upon a jagged peak surveying the kingdom of giants. His plumage clashed with the white-blue glare of the glaciers, making him appear as a streak of living fire. Without warning, Fjalar let loose a crow that rattled the icicles from cavern mouths. The frost giants stirred, raising their clubs and spears, an undercurrent of excitement rippling through their ranks. The final confrontation with the Aesir was close at hand. Many brandished weapons etched with runes they believed would fell gods. Others roared in savage glee, anticipating the meltdown of an order they had long resented. Far below, the wind carried Fjalar's cry into cracks and tunnels where creatures hidden for ages awoke. Rumblings in the frozen earth signaled the marching footsteps of a legion. The giant king, Hrym, rose from his throne of ice, a cruel gleam in his eyes. Their time had come, and they would fight for dominion over all the realms. In the shadowy expanse of Hel's domain, the dead stirred as well. Hel, half living and half corpse, felt a restless shift in her realm. The endless gray plains flickered with ghostly lights, as souls wandered with renewed urgency. From within an ancient crypt emerged the third rooster, pale as a bleached bone. Its crow was eerie and hollow, reverberating through the winding catacombs of Helheim. Uncounted dead, warriors who had not earned a place in Valhalla, cowards, traitors, and unlucky souls, lifted their heads at the sound. Among them were restless shades of criminals and oathbreakers, gathering in uneasy clusters. Hel watched in silence as the pale rooster's call spread like a chill wind. She sensed the boundary between life and death weakening, just enough for the dead to march forth if given the chance. And she knew that chance would come soon. For when Naglfar set sail, the dead would have their day of vengeance against the living. A resonance deeper than any rooster's crow rumbled from beneath the earth. Garmr, the monstrous hound of Hel, began to strain against his fetters. For aeons, he had guarded the entrance to the underworld, ensuring that souls did not escape before their time. Now, spurred by the cosmic shift, Garmr howled, an ear-splitting bay that traveled through the cold air, up the trunk of Yggdrasil, and into the starless sky. In Asgard, the gods felt the reverberation. Many exchanged fearful glances, for Garmr's howling signaled that the chain of Hel's guardian was fraying. If Garmr was loose, it meant the underworld's gates could soon yawn wide, releasing an army of the dead. Panic flared across Midgard. Those few humans who still clung to survival in that barren winter heard the roosters and the howling hound echoing in their dreams, if not their waking hours. Some believed it was the wail of frost-laden winds. Others believed the world itself was screaming. Cults formed around doomsday prophets, urging followers to embrace their final hours. A few resilient souls vowed to stand and fight if apocalypse came, constructing rudimentary barricades against terrors unknown. In Asgard, the alarm was clear. The time for final preparations had arrived. Odin summoned the Aesir and Vanir to council once more, voice resonating with urgency. The memory of Baldur's death weighed on them all, reminding them that their immortality was already punctured by fate's spear. Thor sharpened his vigilance, Mjolnir never leaving his side. Freyr and Freya, though they lamented the destruction of nature, stood ready with weapons and magic. Tyr, one hand on his sword's hilt, silently braced for the bloodshed to come. Heimdall kept a firm hold on Gjallarhorn, the final signal that would herald the official start of Ragnarok's great battle. Over the next days, perhaps weeks, time blurred in the half-light, those in Asgard awaited the next step. They knew that the crowing of the roosters was only the initial alarm, that Garmr's howl was a precursor to the monstrous events soon to follow. But how soon, and in what form? Loki, skulking in the corners of Asgard, observed the mounting fear with bright, calculating eyes. Though many suspected him of engineering Baldur's death, no one had yet seized him. Whispers said he might soon flee the realm to rally the giants or break loose his own punishment. The gods, anxious and disorganized, hesitated over immediate reprisals. A hush fell upon the 9 worlds in the wake of the rooster's triple call. Every realm braced itself. The air was electric with tension, as though the fabric of creation itself was about to tear. Would the wolves devour the sun and moon tomorrow or the next day? When would the oceans rise? Where would the first blow fall on the day of the final battle? Even the unyielding grip of Fimbulwinter seemed momentarily overshadowed by the knowledge that a far greater storm loomed. For though the world lay under a white frozen shroud, the real fires, Surtur's fires, were soon to come, and with them the final unraveling of everything the gods had cherished. High in the sky, Gullinkambi crowed once more. The Einherjar responded with a shout that shook the rafters of Valhalla. Their weapons clashed against shields in a thunderous salute. In that resonant moment, all illusions of eternal peace were torn away, replaced by the cold clarity of approaching war. Chapter 7. Loki's Chains Break. Far beneath the surface of the earth, pinned by agonizing bonds, Loki brooded in the darkness. Once the sly trickster of Asgard, he had orchestrated Baldur's death and sown discord among the gods. For these crimes they had bound him to a jagged rock in a remote cavern, a serpent overhead dripping venom onto his face. Long had Sigyn, Loki's loyal wife, stood beside him, catching the serpent's venom in a bowl to spare him momentary torment. But even her devotion had limits. The bowl would fill, and she'd have to empty it, during which time venom would hiss against Loki's flesh, causing him to writhe and scream. These echoes of agony seeped through the cracks of the earth. Some say that Loki's howls caused the earthquakes now racking the 9 worlds. Others insisted it was Fenrir's fury or Jormungandr's stirrings. In truth, all these cosmic agonies wove together, and as the chain reaction of Ragnarök accelerated, the very foundations that held Loki's bonds in place began to buckle. Sigyn trembled as the cavern shook. Stalactites crashed down. The serpent overhead slipped sideways, hissing in alarm. Beneath Loki's body, the rock fissured. Gleaming runes etched by the Aesir to secure him started to flicker, their magic faltering. Sensing an opportunity, Loki summoned every ounce of cunning hatred he possessed. It had been eons since he had a glimmer of hope, but the swirl of catastrophic energies awakened new strength within him. Where before the runes had been too strong, now they were weakened by the universal upheaval. He twisted, ignoring the searing venom that splashed his skin. The iron bonds groaned. Sigyn cried out, clutching the bowl to catch more venom, but Loki roared like a wounded beast. With a final tortured heave, he wrenched his arms free in a burst of sparks. The shackles snapped, clanging against the ground. In that moment, the serpent overhead fell from its perch, startled. Loki rolled aside, panting, shoulders bloodied. Sigyn stood nearby, equal parts relief and terror in her eyes. The trickster god rose shakily, testing limbs that had long been pinned. The runes on his ankles were next, and with a savage kick, he shattered them. At once, a wave of raw, chaotic energy flooded Loki's being. He had always been a shapeshifter, a cunning manipulator. Now he was unbound. A vicious grin spread across his face as he felt old magic stirring in his veins. As the cavern continued to quake, he turned to Sigyn. "You have served me faithfully, my wife," he murmured, voice ragged. "But now we stand at the edge of Ragnarök. Leave this place if you wish, find refuge however you can, for I have much to do." Torn between love and fear, Sigyn hesitated. Finally she touched Loki's cheek, where the venom had scarred him, and fled, seeking safety in a realm yet untouched. Loki watched her vanish into the trembling darkness. With a low snarl, Loki began his ascent toward the surface. Each step felt like a rebirth. Memories flashed, the jeering faces of the Aesir, Tyr placing the bonds, Skadi placing the serpent, overhead. Thor's mocking grin, Odin's cold condemnation. And behind it all, the echo of Baldur's death scene, his most triumphant trick. The warren of tunnels leading out of the cavern collapsed in places, forcing Loki to use shapeshifting to slip through tight crevices. At times he became a serpent himself, slithering through cracks. At others, a sleek wolf bounding over debris. Finally he emerged onto the battered surface of Midgard. Snow-blasted winds greeted him. The stench of decay clung to the air. He saw the evidence of Fimbulwinter and catastrophic floods, the footprints of Fenrir in the distance, steam rising where Jörmungandr's poison had tainted rivers. Loki breathed in the chaos like sweet perfume. This was a world already on the brink. Now, at last, he would gather the final pieces of the war that would topple the Aesir, for good. Ord. The watchers at the gate, seeing Loki's ragged yet triumphant form, hesitated. Some recognized him from days of old. Their chieftain Hrym, massive icicles woven into his beard, stepped forward scowling. "We heard the roosters crow, trickster. You come on an ill wind." Loki smirked, his voice dripping with cunning confidence. "The time has come for the old grudges to bear fruit, Hrym. Fenrir is unleashed, Jörmungandr roams free, and I stand unchained. Join me, and your people shall exact vengeance upon the Aesir once and for all." Hrym looked to the distant peaks, where a red-tinged sky revealed storms of ice and fire brewing. The runes of ancient prophecy had always foretold such an alliance in the final hour. With a grim nod, Hrym extended an arm the size of a tree trunk. Loki clasped it, sealing their bond. But giants alone were not enough. Loki turned his mind to Hel's domain, where legions of dishonorable dead yearned for another chance at life or revenge. Hel was Loki's daughter, half-living beauty and half-rotten horror. Though father and daughter had rarely acted in concert, the swirling energies of Ragnarök bound their destinies together. As if summoned, Hel's presence flickered in Loki's awareness. He sensed her gathering the damned souls for war. Soon, the ship Naglfar, constructed from the fingernails of the dead, would be set afloat by the deluge Jörmungandr had caused. Loki meant to captain it, leading an unholy fleet against Asgard's gates. Sure enough, at a haunted coastline in the far north, Loki found Naglfar moored in a half-frozen bay. Chiseled from cadaverous nails, its hull exuded a silent malice. Rising floodwaters, swollen by the thrashing serpent, had begun to lift it from its moorings. Dead warriors, wraiths, and other monstrous beings lurked on the shore, half-formed ranks awaiting orders. Hel's specter lingered, though she did not greet Loki openly. She observed from the shadows, letting her father claim the role of commander. Loki stepped onto the vessel, each footfall echoing with dreadful portent. At last, he stood at the prow, surveying the hideous craft. He spread his arms wide. "Come forth, lost souls! Answer the call of Ragnarök! We sail on the tide to bring ruin upon the Aesir." A ragged cheer rose, rattling bones and scraping throats that had long forgotten speech. The hold of Naglfar filled with frost giants, ghoulish warriors, and all manner of horrors. The very tide lapped hungrily at the ship's edges, as if eager to see how the final drama would play out. Casting a final baleful glance at the swirling skies, Loki's lips curved in a triumphant grin. He had broken free. Fenrir and Jörmungandr had awakened. Hel's forces stood ready. Only one more crucial piece of the cosmic puzzle remained: the ignition of fire from Muspelheim. Once Surtur marched, the gates of destruction would truly open, and Loki, self-styled conductor of this terrible symphony, was determined that Asgard would burn. Chapter 8. Surtur's March from Muspelheim. At the edge of the cosmos lay Muspelheim, a realm of unquenchable flame. For countless ages, fires roared there in defiance of the surrounding void, an inferno that dwarfed all other blazes in the 9 worlds. It was said that in the earliest dawn of creation, heat from Muspelheim helped shape reality itself. Muspelheim's king, Surtur, was no ordinary giant. Towering above his fiery kin, he was the embodiment of raging heat, armed with a sword said to glow brighter than the sun. Ancient prophecies named Surtur as a key harbinger of Ragnarök. It would be his flames that scorched the earth, consuming all in the final blaze. Throughout the epochs, Surtur had bided his time, his presence more felt than seen. Mortals seldom glimpsed him, only in fleeting visions of volcanic eruptions or cataclysmic wildfires. But now, with the realms shaking and the rooster's calls echoing across creation, Surtur stirred from his volcanic throne. Lava gushed around him in rivers of molten fury, and showers of embers whirled in the superheated air. All around Muspelheim, legions of fire giants readied themselves. Their skin glowed like smoldering coals, and their eyes burned like infernos. Smoldering hammers, flaming spears, and molten chains were collected for war. Over the centuries, these beings had honed their strength in the harshest furnace imaginable, always waiting for the day their king would lead them out to fulfill the final prophecy. Now that day was at hand. When Surtur rose to his full, monumental height, the entire realm seemed to quake in reverence. Lava cascaded from cliffs, cyclones of flame tore through the infernal plains. A thunderous roar escaped Surtur's throat, carrying pure destructive power. It began as a crack high above Muspelheim's darkest peaks. Like a tear in reality, it split the sky, glowing a brilliant crimson against the cosmic night. The air shimmered with unbearable heat, threatening to incinerate anything that drew too close. This was the portal through which Surtur would lead his horde, a breach in the fabric between realms widened by the chaos unleashed everywhere else. In Asgard, Heimdall sensed the distortion instantly. Standing guard at the now ice-slick Bifrost, he peered across the cosmos, heart pounding. His keen sight caught the silhouette of Surtur's armies moving like a tide of living flames. The watchman lifted Gjallarhorn to his lips, but Odin's order stayed his hand for the moment. Not yet, not until the final approach. Surtur stepped through the cosmic rift first, planting a colossal foot upon the outskirts of the Bifrost, which arched from Midgard's vantage like a glimmering rainbow. But that once vibrant bridge was weakened by Fimbul winter's cold and the roiling energies tearing at the worlds. Flames licked across the bridge as Surtur's presence warped the air. Behind him, the fire giants emerged in waves, each brandishing weapons forged in Muspelheim's fiery furnaces. Their war cries merged into a deafening chorus that reverberated all the way to Midgard. Mortals who looked skyward at that moment saw the shimmering arc of the Bifrost awash in tongues of flame, and they cowered in terror. With each step Surtur took, the Bifrost groaned, fracturing under the colossal heat and weight. Hairline cracks danced across its once lustrous surface. Heimdall, from the Asgardian end, tightened his grip on his horn, uncertain whether to blow it. He was alone there, for Odin had positioned the other gods to gather their forces deeper in Asgard's interior. At last, Surtur's flaming sword swung in a sweeping arc. The bridge shuddered. Chunks of prismatic crystal broke away, tumbling down in a rain of iridescent shards. Heimdall took a decisive breath and lifted Gjallarhorn to his lips. Its clarion call rang out across every realm, a sound so potent that it startled even Surtur's vanguard. It was the war trumpet of the gods, signifying that the final battle was truly beginning. In Asgard's grand courtyard, Odin stood with Thor, Tyr, and a host of assembled warriors, both Aesir and Einherjar. The instant they heard Gjallarhorn's blast, the hush shattered. Armor rattled as the gods donned their battle gear. Valkyries took to the air on swift steeds, circling the palace spires. Thor's eyes crackled with lightning, Mjolnir sparking in anticipation. Freya and Freyr, once heralds of fertility and love, braced themselves. Freyr clutched a curved antler in lieu of the sword he had long ago given away, an ill omen, for he knew Surtur would be his dread opponent. Freya readied her magic, determined to shield the innocence that remained. From where Heimdall stood, the heat was unbearable. Yet he faced Surtur with unflinching resolve, brandishing his gleaming sword. Surtur, amused by the lone sentinel, moved to strike him down with a blazing slash. But Heimdall, swift as starlight, leaped back, letting Surtur's blade crash into the remains of the Bifrost. The resulting explosion of heat and color was blinding. The bridge buckled and snapped like a felled tree, sending shock waves through the sky. Flames and shards of rainbow crystal burst outward, raining onto Midgard in a prismatic inferno. The horizon glowed with an otherworldly hue, a menacing aurora of swirling embers. Heimdall, battered by the blast, managed to land on a fractured segment of the bridge. He sounded Gjallarhorn again, ensuring no doubt remained. The enemy was at the gates. Surtur pressed onward, stepping onto Asgardian ground at last. A scorched footprint smoldered where he planted his foot. His fire giant legions followed, and the realm of the gods quaked with each new arrival. In the distance, thunder rolled, as if Thor's fury answered Surtur's defiance. Thus began the conflagration that would spread like wildfire across Asgard's landscapes. Forests that had somehow survived Fimbulwinter, now ignited, turned to ash in moments. Towers of white stone began to blacken under the onslaught of blazing giants. Some of the lesser halls collapsed almost instantly, engulfed by Surtur's unstoppable heat. As mortals, giants, and even gods reeled under the weight of these combined catastrophes, Fenrir's rampages, Jörmungandr's floods, Hel's restless legions, and now Surtur's inferno, hope dimmed to a flicker. Yet Odin and the Aesir still stood, mustering their courage for one final stand. The Einherjar, the valiant dead chosen over centuries, rallied behind them, swords gleaming with a defiance that belied the certain destruction swirling around them. In that searing moment, every prophecy, every omen, every ancient verse converged into a single truth. Ragnarok was here, no longer a distant threat whispered by the wise or carved on rune stones. It was upon them, roaring in Surtur's flames and prowling in Fenrir's snarls. The cycle of the cosmos had reached its breaking point. Still, Odin did not despair. Even as Surtur's sword carved molten arcs in the sky, the All-Father lifted his spear, Gungnir, and addressed the gathered gods and Einherjar. His voice rang out like steel on steel. "Stand firm, we knew this day would come. Let us face it with the bravery and honor that has ever marked the Aesir. If this is the doom written for us, let our last deeds echo through the ages." A great cheer erupted, though beneath it lurked fear and sorrow for all they had lost. Yet in that cheer, too, was a spark of defiance. The gods would not cower. If Surtur's flames were to consume the world, they would meet them head-on, valiant, unyielding, and determined to make the final hours of Asgard a testament to courage. And so Surtur's march began in earnest, the final piece of the doomsday tableau. United with the other unleashed horrors, the fire giants pressed forward, leaving the Bifrost shattered behind them. Nightmarish flames danced across the sky, and the clash of cosmic forces reverberated through every realm. In this terrible new dawn, the entire universe stood on the brink, awaiting the final battle that would decide the fate of gods, monsters, and mortals alike. Chapter 9. The Shattered Bifrost. The rainbow-hued bridge that once connected Asgard to the worlds below had long been a symbol of divine splendor. Crafted from cosmic light and bound by ancient runes, the Bifrost had allowed travel for gods and selected mortals between realms. But after Surtur's unstoppable approach, the bridge now lay cracked and blackened, wreathed in rising smoke. Heimdall stood at the Asgardian end of the ruined span, panting from exertion. Small fires sputtered around him, licking at broken shards of prismatic glass that had fallen in the cataclysmic collision. Though he had blown Gjallarhorn to alert Asgard, he felt a wrenching pang of guilt, an abiding sense that the final gateway to his homeland was destroyed on his watch. Surtur and his legion had already advanced beyond the bridge, setting Asgard aflame wherever they marched. Though many fire giants trampled across the final intact sections of the Bifrost, as soon as the bulk of their army had passed, the battered bridge collapsed in earnest. A deafening crack reverberated across the sky, followed by a rain of crystalline shards falling into the void. The once proud arc was gone, severed forever. The brilliant fragments that had once glistened with every color of the rainbow now took on a sullen, flickering glow. They landed in the plains below like shards of broken sunbeams, only to be swallowed by the drifting snow and ashen ground. Heimdall watched, a grim set to his jaw. Even if Asgard survived the coming battle, it would never again be the same. Realizing Surtur was already too far ahead for him to stop alone, Heimdall turned and sprinted after the main host of the Aesir. His heart pounded with urgency. He had no illusions that Surtur would slow his march. Already the horizon flickered with flames where the fire giants advanced, leaving scorched footprints behind them. Columns of smoke coiled high into Asgard's once pristine sky. Through the swirling mix of snow and embers, Heimdall emerged into a courtyard where Odin, Thor, and dozens of armed deities and Einherjar hastened to strategic positions. Some Valkyries helped usher frightened Asgardian denizens into deeper fortifications. The watchers in tall towers rang alarms, but the swirling haze of winter storms and billowing smoke made it difficult to see more than a short distance. "The bridge is gone," Heimdall reported grimly, falling in beside Odin, shattered beyond all hope. Odin nodded, lines of sorrow etched on his brow. "Then the final stage is set. We have no retreat and the enemy has already arrived. Gather what you can, Heimdall. Every blade will soon be needed." As if in response, Thor beckoned to a group of Valkyries. "Secure the palace wings. Evacuate any non-combatants through the side passages. Keep them safe as long as possible. The rest of us prepare to meet Surtur's horde head-on. We can't let them burn all of Asgard without resistance." The Valkyries saluted and soared skyward on swift steeds, cloaks trailing behind them like storm clouds. Below, Tyr, his one hand gripping a war axe, directed groups of Einherjar to vital choke points. The tension in the air was palpable, an entire realm teetering on the brink of an all-consuming blaze. Amid the swirling chaos, small pockets of Asgard's lesser inhabitants huddled in fear, scribes, caretakers, bards, and artisans who had once thrived under Baldur's gentle warmth Now they crowded in half-collapsed archways, listening to distant roars. Some wept, clutching personal mementos. Others stared blankly, the enormity of the apocalypse sinking in. One young bard, arms wrapped protectively around a battered lute, gazed at the swirling skies through tears. She had once composed ballads in Baldur's honor, celebrating the unbreakable bond of the Bifrost and the benevolence of the gods. Now, every chord she'd ever played felt like a distant memory, drowned out by the roaring flames. Yet, even in the face of doom, sparks of heroism flared. Here and there, Einherjar formed tight defensive circles, brandishing spears and swords with a stoic resolve that no mortal army could match. Trained daily in Valhalla for this very moment, they would make every inch of Asgard's ground costly for the invaders. A wiry warrior named Eric, once a famed king in Midgard, adjusted his horned helmet and gave an encouraging nod to his brethren. "We died once for glory," he said with a grim smile. "Let's die again for this realm that gave us a second chance." His words elicited a fierce cheer from the nearby warriors, all too ready to fulfill their oath. The ruined Bifrost behind them crackled and popped, sending up flares of rainbow sparks. Even in its destruction, it remained strangely beautiful, a testament to the wonders that had defined Asgard's golden age. Now, it served as a burning beacon of change. No more easy passage between worlds. Ragnarok had severed the final thread of the old order. From a high balcony, Frigg looked on with tear-filled eyes, accompanied by her handmaidens. She felt the fresh sting of losing Baldur all over again, for the Bifrost's destruction felt like another grave marker on the path to total ruin. Still, she clenched her fists, praying silently that her people would endure. With the direct bridge severed, Odin knew that Asgard stood exposed, ironically. Surtur and his legion had forced their way in, yet no reinforcements from mortal allies or other realms could come to the gods' aid. It was now a closed circuit, the Aesir versus the unstoppable chaos forces, locked together until fate resolved their struggle. Sounding a short horn blast of his own, Odin rallied a contingent of gods around him. Freya arrived, magic swirling at her fingertips. Freyr, armed only with his antler blade, followed. Even lesser-known gods like Bragi the Skald and Forseti the Lawbringer took up arms, determined to stand for whatever scraps of order remained. With one eye blazing with determination, Odin raised his spear, Gungnir. "Asgard has never fallen," he declared. "If we must perish, let it be in a stand worthy of the name Aesir. Onward!" Sparks rained from the sky, mingling with falling snow in a surreal blend of ice and fire. War drums sounded from the far end of a scorched promenade, where Surtur's legion advanced in disciplined ranks. Columns of flame erupted, turning once glistening palaces into towering infernos. Beneath the swirling canopy of smoke and embers, two armies prepared to clash. The defenders of Asgard, gods, Einherjar, and Valkyries, arrayed in shining mail and grim determination, and the fire giants, exuding destructive might in every molten step. And Surtur himself loomed, a towering vision of flame incarnate. Even as the Bifrost's remains sizzled into oblivion, a new battlefield took shape, one that would decide the fate of the heavens themselves. Sparks flew on the wind, carrying the lament of a broken rainbow bridge. The final hour drew nearer, and each passing moment cast deeper shadows over the storied realm of the gods. Chapter 10. Naglfar Sets Sail. While Asgard burned under Surtur's flames, the seas roiled on Midgard's horizons. Here, in an accursed harbor far in the north, an unspeakable vessel creaked into motion, Naglfar, the ship of nails. Built from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, it was a hideous testament to the depth of cosmic horror unleashed by Ragnarok. The bay itself was already nightmarish, half-frozen waves caked with sludge and shattered ice. the remnants of coastal villages destroyed by Jörmungandr's floods. Pieces of driftwood and battered corpses bobbed in the brine. Where once fishing boats might have anchored, only bleak ruin remained. Into this grim tableau, Naglfar was moored. Its hull gleamed in pallid moonlight, a patchwork of gray, mottled nail plates bound by unknown sorcery. Instead of sails of cloth, translucent hides hung from its mast, sewn together with sinew. The entire vessel stank of decay and old blood. Atop the prow stood Loki, newly freed from his subterranean prison. He surveyed the deck with a prideful glint in his eye. Around him milled an assortment of horrors, frost giants from Jotunheim, revenant warriors from Hell's domain, and half-rotten ghouls who clutched rusted weapons. Each stared at Loki in malevolent anticipation, awaiting orders. A bitter wind whipped Loki's unbound hair across his scarred face. He felt the chill deep in his bones, but it did not deter him. If anything, the raw, savage environment only stoked his desire for vengeance. "Too long have I lain in torment," he proclaimed, raising his arms, "but no more. Today we sail for the downfall of the Aesir." A ragged cheer rose, chains clanked, rotted throats hissed, and the frost giants rumbled in agreement. Some among the undead pounded the deck with bony fists, the sound reverberating through the grisly timbers of the ship. Beside Loki, the massive figure of Hrym, leader of the frost giants, loomed. Draped in pelts that crackled with frost, Hrym carried an ice-carved axe etched with runic curses. He narrowed his pale eyes, scanning the horizon. "Water is rising faster each moment," he said, voice like distant thunder. "The Midgard serpent stirring has changed the tides. Naglfar is nearly free of the ice." Loki's grin widened. With each monstrous movement of Jörmungandr in the oceans, wave swells mounted, lifting Naglfar from the mud and slush that had once trapped it. Soon the ship would float on open water, unimpeded. From the shoreline, a fresh host of the dead approached, led by spectral banners that fluttered in a ghostly breeze. These were Hell's own forces, souls too dishonorable or unfortunate to earn a place in Valhalla. Their eyes glowed with a dull, hungry light. With rattling armor and clumsy, unearthly gait, they trudged across the frozen beach to board Naglfar, stepping onto its deck as though drawn by an ancient summons. Hovering at the fringes of their ranks was Hel herself, Loki's daughter. Half of her face radiated a chilling beauty, while the other half was decayed. She said nothing, but locked eyes with Loki from afar. A silent agreement passed between them. Both father and daughter knew this was the fulfillment of their darkest destinies. With a final groan and a splintering of ice, Naglfar broke free from the bay. The swirling waters caught it, and the ship lurched forward. Sheets of freezing spray arced over its sides, soaking the assembled horrors. Unperturbed, they peered into the darkness, ready to bring ruin to all living things. Loki raised his arm, and a bitter wind filled the hide sails. The monstrous craft inched away from shore, leaving behind the broken skeletons of docks and drowned settlements. Frost giants manned the oars, each oar a giant's femur, carved with runes of propulsion. Slow at first, the vessel gained momentum, gliding into the tumultuous sea. Beyond the harbor's mouth, the ocean churned under the influence of Jörmungandr. Immense waves, tainted green-black by the serpent's poison, rolled endlessly. Ice floes drifted in confusion, colliding with mountainous swells. Lightning forked across low-hanging clouds, illuminating the ship's dreadful silhouette. Loki maintained balance at the prow, ignoring the stench and spray, relishing each second of looming triumph. At intervals, monstrous shapes, perhaps sea drags or mutated eels twisted by Jörmungandr's venom, bumped against the hull with hollow thuds. The menacing hush of the storm was pierced only by the occasional cackle of undead or the groan of Naglfar's cursed timbers. From the prow, Loki gazed at a distant horizon. There, the black outline of Asgard's high towers was just discernible, backlit by flames. He knew Surtur was already there, unleashing fiery destruction. Fenrir, newly freed, prowled across Midgard's heartlands, snapping up survivors. Jörmungandr ravaged the seas. All the children of Loki had risen, and now Hel's legions were on the move. It was all converging on Vigridr, the prophesied battlefield, a vast plain said to stretch for hundreds of leagues, large enough to contain gods, giants, monsters, and mortal armies all at once. Logically cunning, Loki realized that while Surtur and Fenrir battered Asgard's outer defenses, Naglfar could land its dreadful cargo on the mortal side of the cosmic battlefield and strike from another angle, trapping the defenders. As the ship plowed through roiling waters, the frost giants muttered among themselves. Some recalled ancestral grudges, stories of Thor's hammer flattening their forefathers. Now they would claim vengeance. Others snickered about feasting on the bones of the Aesir once Asgard's walls were shattered. The undead, for their part, stood silent, as though each stilled heartbeat only stoked their hatred for the living. An air of morbid unity prevailed. Frost and decay fused beneath Loki's leadership. The battered souls of Hel's domain would soon clash with the shining spirits of Valhalla's Einherjar in a final contest of the dead. Still, a flicker of deeper emotion crossed Loki's expression as he stared into the swirling gloom. Baldur's death had lit the spark that ignited this apocalypse. Did Loki feel regret? Triumph? It was impossible to parse. Perhaps he only felt the sharp edge of a personal vendetta satisfied. "This world betrayed me first," he whispered, though none but the wind could hear. "Now it will be reshaped in the fires of its own making." Lightning crashed, revealing the monstrous ship in full, a pale juggernaut on a black sea. And so Naglfar pressed onward, carrying the final wave of nightmare that would soon set foot on Vigridr. The orchestration of doom was nearly complete. With Surtur's flames in Asgard and Fenrir's hunts in Midgard, only one step remained, for all forces to meet in one last cataclysmic battle under the dying sky. Chapter 11. The Gathering Armies on Vigridr. Stretching across the horizon in every direction, the plains of Vigridr embodied desolation. No trees broke the flat expanse, no streams or rivers offered reprieve. The soil was cracked, coated with hoarfrost in some patches, churned to mud in others. Here, at the final meeting point of fates, the armies of gods and monsters would converge for one last, definitive conflict. Legends claimed that Vigridr was vast enough to contain all the horrors of the nine worlds at once. Now, as the final hours of Ragnarök approached, it became clear those legends were true. From one edge of the horizon, massive clouds roiled, tinted orange by Surtur's fires, blazing in Asgard. From another direction, tidal waves spawned by Jörmungandr threatened to encroach onto the plains, leaving brackish puddles where land and sea collided. Amid this battered no-man's land, swirling winds carried the stench of death and sulfur. Overhead, the sky remained locked in a perpetual twilight, for Skuld and Hati were drawing ever closer to their prey, the sun and moon. Their howls echoed occasionally, lending an undercurrent of dread to the mustering forces below. In the distance, Odin led a contingent of Aesir and Einherjar to secure a defensive position on slightly elevated ground. The Allfather surveyed the domain with a heart grown heavy. His ravens circled overhead, returning with fleeting glimpses of armies converging from multiple directions, giant battalions, undead hordes, and monstrous beasts. Standing beside Odin, Thor hammered a gauntleted fist against the haft of Mjolnir. "We won't wait for them to come," he growled. "We can't let them choose the hour to strike." Odin lifted a hand in caution. "Patience, my son. The tapestry unfolds. We must stand ready, not rush blindly. When the horn calls, the final clash begins in earnest. Thor gritted his teeth but nodded. Nearby, Tyr, his single hand gripping a shield, silently prepared for what he knew was his own prophesied showdown with Garmr, the monstrous hound. Freya and Freyr knelt together, exchanging a brief sibling glance of encouragement. Freyr clutched his antler blade, while Freya touched the amber necklace Brisingamen at her throat, summoning protective magic for the coming chaos. The ground quaked as a formidable host of frost giants arrived first, led by Hrym. Their voices rumbled like distant avalanches. Their steps churned the soil into slush and mud. Icicles dangled from their beards, and each bore weapons inscribed with runic malice. The frost giants formed a line across the plain, effectively blocking off one flank. Across the field, from the Asgardian vantage, horns sounded in response. The Einherjar, long trained for this day, assembled into disciplined ranks. Banners depicting wolves, ravens, and lightning flapped in the bitter wind, spears angled forward, shields locked. Soon after, Surtur's legion emerged from the western horizon in a fiery wave. In the flickering gloom, it looked like a column of molten rock had spilled across the plains. Surtur himself was at the forefront, brandishing his sun-bright sword. Where the fire giants marched, the grass burst into flame, leaving scorched footprints. Their war cries clashed with the howling winds, sending sparks spiraling into the sky. Seeing Surtur's approach, Thor hefted Mjolnir, eyes blazing with electric fury. The thunder god's muscles tensed at the mere sight of the flaming horde. Lightning crackled overhead, drawn to his rage. A rumble of thunder answered Surtur's roar, as if promising that the final confrontation between fire and thunder would soon explode in the heart of Vigridr. From the east, over the watery horizon, came the silhouette of Naglfar. As it drew closer, watchers could see its grotesque sails and ragged crew. Through the swirling mist, Loki's figure at the prow became visible. Frost giants on the deck raised standard banners, while undead clutched swords crusted with grave dirt. When at last Naglfar ground ashore on the fringes of Vigridr, the legions of hell poured forth, forming rank upon rank of ragged figures. Some still wore the tattered armor they'd died in, others were little more than skeletons or wights. At their head, Loki strode, face set in cold determination. Hell herself glided just behind him, half-living visage serene, half-decayed side, a visage of nightmare. With each step they advanced toward the center of the plains, joining forces with the frost giants under Hrym's banner. The colossal figure of Fenrir could be glimpsed in the distance, bounding across the rocky terrain, jaws dripping with fresh gore. There, too, slithered Jörmungandr's massive coils in the far background, ready to strike at the gods. Amid the swirling winds, Heimdall raised Gjallarhorn once more, its clarion call slicing through the clamor of thousands of voices. The sound reached every ear on Vigridr, whether mortal, god, giant, or undead. It proclaimed the official onset of the final battle. The time for mustering was done. Now destiny demanded its due. With that, Odin rode forth on his steed, Sleipnir, brandishing Gungnir. His voice boomed across the lines of Einherjar and gods. We stand at the brink, fight for the honor of Asgard and all we have cherished. Face these foes without fear, for we are the Aesir. A mighty roar answered him. Swords clanged against shields. The Einherjar advanced in disciplined formations, forming a bulwark against the encroaching giants and the walking dead. Valkyries soared overhead, scanning for vantage points, lances at the ready to pierce monstrous throats. Never before had such a coalition of horrors assembled. Fenrir prowled to one side, hackles raised, while Jörmungandr coiled in watery channels that snaked into the plains. Surtur's inferno advanced from another flank, colliding with the cold presence of the frost giants. Loki's cunning eyes flicked between the mightiest gods anticipating his chance to strike. From the vantage of a mortal observer, if any were still alive to witness it, the scene on Vigridr resembled the collision of nightmares. The sky churned with thunderheads, lit sporadically by stabs of lightning. Ash and smoke from Asgard's distant fires drifted overhead, turning the twilight deeper and more menacing. The stench of poison and charred earth intermingled, a testament to the cosmic scale of destruction. For one charged moment, everything was poised. Thousands of heartbeats thundered in unison. Warriors tested their grips on spear hafts. Giants rumbled incantations. The undead hissed as Hell's cold aura emanated around them. Odin's raven swooped overhead, cawing in final warning. Even the cosmos seemed to hold its breath. Skull and Hati hovered mere strides away from the terrified sun and moon. The last glimmers of light that shone upon Vigridr felt borrowed, ephemeral. Soon those orbs might be devoured, plunging the world into permanent night. Yet no one fled. Both sides, bound by fate, remained locked in place for that timeless heartbeat, knowing that the next instant would ignite the greatest battle existence had ever seen. Odin inhaled sharply, as if to draw in the entire realm's courage. Surtur's flames pulsed, as though in response. Fenrir's low growl rumbled across the plain, and Jörmungandr reared its colossal head, venom dripping. From a far vantage, Loki smirked, while Heimdall steeled himself, horns still echoing faintly. Then came a collective roar as the armies surged forward. Swords met claws, spears met flaming scimitars, roars of giants mingled with the war cries of gods, while Valkyries dove to meet the shrieking undead. The final tapestry of fate unwound, each thread snapping into violent motion. Vigridr exploded into chaos. Ragnarök, long whispered in prophecy, was no longer a distant threat. It was here, a savage reality, playing out beneath a wounded sky, on a battlefield big enough for the end of the world. And in that swirling maelstrom of ruin and heroism, the destinies of gods and monsters collided in a single cataclysmic dance. Chapter 12. The First Clashes on the Battlefield. The instant the opposing forces surged toward each other on Vigridr, an ear-splitting din erupted. Iron clashed with steel, claws raked against shields, and spells crackled through the frigid air. Smoke, embers, and swirling snow twisted into strange shapes above the melee, as if the elements themselves were confused by the cosmic upheaval. Heimdall's horns still reverberated in the air as he charged into battle, sword flashing in the half-light. Near him, Einherjar, formerly mortal heroes, formed phalanxes, their disciplined shields locking tightly in place. These warriors had trained tirelessly in Valhalla for this day, and their cohesion showed. They advanced with methodical brutality, spears punching through the lines of undead that lurched in from Hell's domain. Meanwhile, on the opposite flank, frost giants crashed into heavily armored Vanir and Aesir. The ground trembled beneath the weight of gargantuan footsteps. War cries thundered back and forth, giants brandishing clubs carved from ice, while the gods retaliated with swords and axes flaring with magical brilliance. Above the chaos, Valkyries descended in deadly arcs. One swooped to skewer a frost giant's eye with her lance, then soared away before it could swat her from the sky. Another guided a wounded Einherjar to temporary safety behind a line of godly defenders. Their wings beat in tense rhythm with the roars and shrieks below. Near the center of the fray, Thor wasted no time entering the heart of combat. Lightning coiled around his body like living snakes, and Mjolnir blazed with raw, thunderous power. With a roar that rivaled the storm, he swung the hammer in a wide arc. Jagged bolts of lightning burst outward, electrifying a knot of undead warriors and sending them collapsing in spasms of crackling energy. A cluster of frost giants bellowed as they advanced on Thor's position, thinking to overpower him with sheer size. He met them head-on, hurling Mjolnir. The hammer tore through a giant's torso and kept going, returning to Thor's outstretched hand. Sparks lit up the battlefield, and the giant crashed to the ground, sending up a flurry of dust and snow. All the while, Thor's mind churned with anticipation of his greatest foe, Jörmungandr. He could sense the Midgard serpent coiled on the outskirts of the battlefield, its colossal form obscured by rolling waves and swirling fog. The time for their destined showdown had not yet come, but he could feel it drawing closer with every beat of his hammer. Not far away, Freyr and Freya fought side by side, a testament to the Vanir's pride and unity. Freyr, wielding his antler blade, a poor substitute for the enchanted sword he once relinquished, nonetheless cut through undead and monstrous shapes with determined efficiency. Each slash of the blade seemed to radiate a subtle warmth, as if channeling the last flickers of fertility and life into the frozen battlefield. Freya, meanwhile, let loose bursts of Satyr, Norse magic that shimmered like auroras. She summoned illusions that confused enemy ranks, causing frost giants to swing at phantoms, while Einherjar closed in for lethal strikes. When a particularly towering undead warrior lunged at her, she unleashed a protective ward of swirling golden runes. The creature recoiled, bones cracking under the onslaught of pure magical force. Even as they pressed forward, Freyr felt dread coiling in his gut. Across the battlefield he glimpsed the towering figure of Surtur in the distance, a beacon of living flame that scorched the earth with every step. The prophecy was clear. Freyr would face Surtur and likely meet his end without the weapon he'd once bartered away. Yet the Vanir god set his jaw and pressed on, determined to fulfill his role no matter the price. Elsewhere, Heimdall found himself beset by Hel's legion. Gaunt figures clawed at him, spectral eyes burning with animosity. With his unmatched senses, he anticipated their strikes, parrying sword thrusts and slashing back with lethal precision. His blade gleamed under the faint sunlight, still clinging to the sky. One of the undead wore the rusted armor of an old warlord, patches of flesh hanging from its skeletal frame. Hissing out a broken war cry, it swung a corroded axe. Heimdall twisted aside, delivering a riposte that shattered the ghoul's ribcage. Without missing a beat, he pivoted to skewer another monstrosity that tried to flank him. All the while, Gjallarhorn hung at his hip, silent now after its summons. The Einherjar, despite their valor, began to suffer casualties. The tide of enemies was vast beyond mortal comprehension. Each time an undead or giant fell, two more seemed to take its place. Screams mingled with the ring of steel, creating an unending cacophony. The ground grew slick with blood, melting the frost underfoot and turning portions of the battlefield into a treacherous mire. Valkyries plucked the newly fallen Einherjar from the chaos, but this time there was no second chance in Valhalla. Ragnarök spelled an end to those older cycles. The spirits of the slain vanished into uncertainty, whether they soared to some unknown realm or dissolved into cosmic oblivion, none could say. Skirting the edges of the battlefield, Loki observed the carnage with a calculating gleam in his eye. Clad in dark leathers and hidden by illusions, he slipped through pockets of chaos to sow confusion. A subtle glamour here made Aesir warriors see each other as enemies, an illusion there lured a squad of Einherjar into an ambush by frost giants. Now and then, a flicker of guilt crossed Loki's visage, memories of a time when he feasted alongside the very gods he now helped destroy. But the bitterness of his imprisonment and Baldur's death overshadowed any remorse. Malice and cunning guided his steps, culminating in lightning-quick attacks with his knives or blasts of shape-shifting magic. Every corner of Vigridr erupted with these smaller skirmishes, presaging the monumental clashes yet to come. So many ancient feuds demanded resolution, so many sworn fates pushing gods and monsters toward their prophesied ends. Overhead, Skjöll and Hati's howls reverberated, a dire chorus driving the combatants onward. In the midst of it all, Odin's ravens circled, their black feathers drifting down like omens. Whenever Odin spied a gap in the lines, he maneuvered the Aesir to fill it, barking orders that carried above the tumult. His voice steadied them, though each warrior felt the enormity of what they faced. For the moment, the savage melee continued unabated, as if each side tested the other's resolve. Yet all combatants sensed that the real storms of wrath, Odin confronting Fenrir, Thor clashing with Jörmungandr, Freyr meeting Surtur in battle, Tyr-dueling Garmr, and Heimdall crossing blades with Loki, were still imminent. This preliminary chaos was simply the wind-up to the cataclysmic final movements of Ragnarök. Thus, with each clang of sword against shield, each flash of lightning, each roar of a giant, the momentum built. In the swirling gloom and bitter cold of Vigridr, fate tightened its grip, ready to plunge the Nine Worlds into the darkest hour before the dawn. Chapter 13. Odin versus Fenrir. At the heart of the battlefield, Odin rode Sleipnir through the fray, eyes scanning the storm of conflict. Occasionally he paused, driving his spear Gungnir into encroaching foes. Every thrust was swift and sure, guided by centuries of wisdom and countless battles. Yet he was searching for his destined adversary, the monstrous wolf Fenrir, whose release had shaken the cosmos. The All-Father had known this confrontation was inevitable, since the day the Aesir bound Fenrir with Gleipnir. Despite every attempt to forestall Ragnarök, the beast was free now, full of rage that no chain could hold. It was personal too. Fenrir was Loki's son, an outcast of Asgard, and a testament to the tragedies that had befallen the divine family. A hush seemed to fall around Odin, even amidst the clamor, as he finally spotted Fenrir among the ranks of giants and undead. The wolf towered over most creatures on the field, fur bristling like razor wire. His eyes glowed with a hateful fire, fangs bared in a snarl that seemed to drip with centuries of pent-up vengeance. Odin took a steadying breath. "It ends here," he whispered, gently patting Sleipnir's flank. The eight-legged steed snorted and charged forward, carrying the All-Father straight toward Fenrir. When Fenrir noticed Odin's approach, he unleashed a roar that rattled the distant mountains. The wolf lunged, scattering friend and foe alike in his path. Sunken footprints marked Fenrir's advance in the muddy ground. Every muscle in the wolf's body coiled for the kill, driven by a savage hunger to devour the very god who once orchestrated his imprisonment. Odin met Fenrir's glare head-on, guiding Sleipnir with expert precision. He hurled Gungnir, the spear that never missed its mark. The weapon shot forward in a blur of lethal grace. Fenrir twisted at the last moment, jaws snapping shut on Gungnir's haft. Sparks erupted as unbreakable teeth clashed with spear shaft forged by dwarven mastery. Despite the spear's enchantments, Fenrir's sheer power deflected the blow. Gungnir ricocheted away, lodging in the earth a few yards away. In a heartbeat, Fenrir lunged again, jaws wide enough to swallow a warhorse whole. Odin wheeled Sleipnir aside, but the wolf's muzzle caught one of the steed's hind legs. With a desperate shriek, Sleipnir kicked free, narrowly escaping a crippling bite. But the moment's delay allowed Fenrir to bring his massive paw crashing down, knocking Odin from the saddle. The All-Father rolled across the muddy ground, his armor scraping. Before he could stand, Fenrir was upon him, hot breath washing over Odin's face. One snap of those jaws, and Odin would be torn asunder. The Father of Gods gazed into the maw of destiny itself, a swirl of rancid breath and sharp fangs glistening in the murky light. Odin managed to lift an arm, summoning a burst of runic energy. Runes flared along his gauntlet, momentarily pushing Fenrir's snout aside. But the wolf pressed harder, drool sizzling on Odin's armor. Slowly, inexorably, the beast forced Odin back toward Gungnir's position, though, ironically, the All-Father couldn't reach the spear without leaving himself exposed. Time seemed to slow. Odin recalled the countless prophecies that spoke of his end, how Fenrir would devour him whole at Ragnarök. He'd peered into Mimir's well, sacrificed an eye for wisdom, and read the runes that spelled out this very moment. A sudden calm washed over him, a grim acceptance that his fate was sealed. Still, he would not go quietly. Summoning the last reserves of his might, Odin formed a shimmering barrier of runes. The barrier pushed Fenrir's snout back another few inches. Panting, the wolf snarled, flames practically dancing in his eyes. Odin braced himself for the final clash. "So it is written," Odin murmured, voice trembling with both resignation and defiance. "But my death shall not be in vain." The runic shield flickered, a candle against a hurricane. Fenrir's brute strength and hatred slammed against it again and again. Each impact rattled Odin to the core, draining the magic that kept the shield intact. Cracks of pale light appeared in the shield's surface. Fenrir sniffed out weakness, pressing relentlessly. With a final deafening roar, Fenrir shattered Odin's barrier. The All-Father staggered, arm numb from the strain. Fenrir lunged, maw gaping wide. Odin's reflexes allowed him one last desperate attempt. He grabbed Fenrir's upper jaw with both hands, straining to keep it from snapping shut. But the wolf's monstrous force was insurmountable. A heartbeat later, Fenrir's jaws clamped down, engulfing Odin in darkness. The All-Father vanished, devoured by the wolf. A hush fell over that portion of the battlefield, as if even the raging armies paused in shock at the sight. In the wake of Odin's fall, Fenrir lifted his head and howled. The sound was a blend of victory and raw, ancient rage, echoing to the farthest corners of Vigridr. The father of gods, the architect of so much history, was gone in a single, brutal moment. From across the battlefield, Aesir and Einherjar alike felt a jolt of horror and sorrow. Some fell to their knees, weapons clattering. Others screamed defiance, charging blindly into renewed battle. Thor, in the midst of clashing with towering giants, froze momentarily as he sensed a rip in the fabric of reality. Odin's presence had vanished. Yet Fenrir did not stand triumphant for long. Destiny, though harsh, was balanced. Odin's death set in motion another prophecy, one involving Odin's son, Vidar, the silent god of vengeance. Emerging from the chaos, Vidar charged, face set in grim determination. He wore a thick shoe fashioned from all the scraps of leather mortal cobblers had discarded. Legend said this shoe could withstand the jaws of Fenrir. With a swift leap, Vidar thrust his foot into Fenrir's lower jaw, prying it down. The wolf snarled, trying to snap shut, but the enchanted shoe held fast. An unimaginable strength burned in Vidar's eyes. He seized Fenrir's upper jaw, forcing it upward. With a raw cry of vengeance, Vidar tore the wolf's maw asunder, rending muscle and bone in a spray of blood. Fenrir collapsed, life fleeing his monstrous form. Thus, father and son, Odin and Fenrir, met their intertwined destinies, and Vidar avenged the All-Father in a single, decisive act. In the gloom of Vigridr, a hush settled over that decisive scene. Though Fenrir fell, Odin was gone. The ruler of Asgard, the mastermind of its glories, lay forever beyond mortal or divine reach. Weary from his violent victory, Vidar knelt in the mud, his father's sacrifice ringing in his ears. Overhead, the sky grew darker as Skuld and Hati inched closer to devouring the sun and moon. There would be little time for mourning. The battle raged on, and more tragedies were yet to unfold. In that moment, the clash of swords and roars of giants resumed, as the cosmic war showed no mercy. But for those who paused, sorrow mixed with grim resolve. Odin's death was a turning point, a harrowing reminder that even the mightiest could fall at Ragnarok. Chapter 14, Thor vs. Jormungandr. The battlefield, still reeling from Odin's death, found no respite. As doom advanced across Vigridr, attention turned to yet another ancient feud. Towering in the distance loomed Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, coiled at the edges of the plains where water lapped against cracked earth. Occasionally, the serpent raised its massive head, poisonous spittle dripping from fangs the size of tree trunks. Thor had clashed with Jormungandr before. Numerous myths told of their encounters. He had once fished the serpent from the depths of the ocean, nearly striking a killing blow, only to have the line cut by a terrified giant. Their hatred was mutual and primal. Where Thor represented the realm's protector, Jormungandr embodied a chaotic force that sought to envelop Midgard in venomous ruin. Standing among the swirling dust and blood-soaked terrain, Thor sensed Jormungandr's approach like a drumbeat against his ribs. The earth quaked as the serpent slithered closer, leaving wide trenches in its wake. Nearby, the battered forms of giants and undead parted, wary of the colossal beast. Even Surtur's fiery legion avoided crossing the serpent's path. Jormungandr recognized no allies beyond the cosmic doom it heralded. Thor leveled Mjolnir at the serpent's gargantuan head. Lightning gathered overhead, forming a roiling tempest that mirrored the god's fury. Bolts cracked the sky, reflecting in the serpent's lidless eyes. Within Thor's chest, a tempest of wrath and sorrow churned. The loss of Odin, the plight of Asgard, the memory of Baldur's death. All of it channeled into Mjolnir's crackling power. As if answering the challenge, Jormungandr reared to its full height, coils stacking like a living tower. A hiss rumbled through the serpent's body, spraying droplets of venom across the battlefield. Where the venom fell, the ground sizzled and smoked. Even the frost giants took a step back, unwilling to stand in that noxious rain. With a booming voice, Thor roared, "Jormungandr, your time has come." And with that he charged forward, boots pounding the mud, heart racing with divine purpose. The serpent struck first. Its massive head darted down, jaws snapping at Thor with lethal speed. But Thor hurled Mjolnir straight into the serpent's open maw. A clap of thunder split the air as the hammer smashed fangs and inner flesh, sending a shockwave reverberating down Jormungandr's sinuous body. The beast recoiled, venom spraying from the ruined segments of its mouth. Not waiting for the hammer to return, Thor dove aside. Moments later, Mjolnir whirled back to his hand. He spun, unleashing a second blow to the serpent's flank. Scales the size of shields cracked, and Jormungandr emitted a roar that shook the sky. Enraged, Jormungandr coiled its immense body around Thor's position, creating a ring of living flesh that tightened like a python's constriction. Thor found himself in a tightening corridor of scales, the serpent's face looming overhead. Its breath was a toxic gale, stinging his eyes and making the air heavy to breathe. Still gripping Mjolnir, Thor battered against the encircling coils. Lightning erupted wherever the hammer struck, scorching flesh and forcing the serpent to loosen its grip. Yet Jormungandr persevered, snapping its tail around to strike from behind. The tail slammed Thor with bone-jarring force, hurling him across the battlefield. He tumbled, armor scraping the earth. Yet before the serpent could close in for a killing strike, Thor regained his feet, summoning a swirl of thunderclouds to shield his approach. Lightning surged in an explosive arc, lancing from the heavens into Mjolnir. Thor directed the blinding bolt straight into Jormungandr's side. The serpent's scales glowed white-hot, smoke rising as flesh seared. Poison hissed and boiled, releasing a vile stench that made nearby soldiers gag. Stepping forward, Thor followed with a relentless flurry of hammer blows. Each strike landed like a meteor, cracking scales and splattering viscous ichor across the churned ground. Jörmungandr hissed in agony, thrashing so violently that entire sections of the battlefield were plowed under. Giants and undead alike were crushed under the serpent's colossal flailing. Despite the serpent's size, Thor's relentless assault wore it down. Jörmungandr's coils became disordered, its once coordinated lunges sloppy with pain. Summoning every ounce of his divine strength, Thor leaped onto the serpent's heaving body and rushed along its spine toward the head. Lightning crackled in a swirling halo around him, and the air smelled of ozone. Jörmungandr, sensing impending doom, let out a final deafening roar and lunged. Thor answered by driving Mjolnir down with cataclysmic force. The serpent's skull caved under the blow, shattered scales raining out in all directions. For a heartbeat, Jörmungandr froze, eyes rolled back, then its mighty coils spasmed and went limp, a titan felled by thunder. Spattered in the serpent's pungent venom and ichor, Thor staggered back, chest heaving. He had done what no mortal or lesser deity could, slain the Midgard serpent. Yet even in victory, fate took its toll. Venom from Jörmungandr's mortal wound sprayed across Thor, coating his arms and shoulders. Instantly, it burned like acid. Thor grit his teeth, fighting the agony. He stumbled away from the serpent's corpse. Each breath labored, as if the poison were already gnawing at his insides. Having vanquished his greatest foe, Thor managed a brief, triumphant grin, only for it to twist into a grimace of pain. The serpent's lethal venom coursed through his veins. His vision blurred, black spots danced at the edges of his sight. Still, he refused to collapse. With trembling hands, he lifted Mjolnir high, letting out a victory roar that resonated across Vigridr. A handful of Einherjar, who had witnessed the clash, cheered. But the battlefield spared no time for celebration. All around, chaos continued. Surtur, Loki, Hel's undead, and myriad giants still fought the remaining gods and Valkyries. Thor took one step away from Jörmungandr's corpse, then another. The burning venom raged in his veins. By the third step, his muscles felt like fire. By the fourth, his breath came in ragged gasps. By the fifth, blood trickled from his mouth. By the sixth, sweat poured off him in rivers. By the seventh, he nearly fell to a knee but forced himself upright. By the eighth, his vision dimmed completely. On the ninth step, his body finally gave out. Collapsing beside the serpent he had slain, Thor exhaled a shuddering breath. Mjolnir tumbled from his grip, landing in the muck with a dull thud. The thunder god's eyes fluttered shut, and he moved no more. His final victory paid for with his life, just as prophecy had foretold. In the swirling confusion of the battlefield, a few Valkyries glimpsed Thor's final moments. One of them, tears streaking her soot-stained face, swooped low as if to lift him away. But it was too late. Thor's spirit had already slipped beyond. She hovered briefly, her mount's wings beating the smoke-filled air, then soared off, compelled to continue the fight. Thus ended the bravest defender of Midgard at the cost of his own life. Yet in that sacrifice, Jörmungandr's threat was extinguished. With Odin and Thor both gone, Asgard's might was irreparably diminished, and the hour of doom advanced toward its zenith. Still, pockets of resistance remained, fueled by the memory of Thor's thunder and the All-Father's unwavering resolve. In the gathering darkness, the next mortal blow loomed, the duel between Freyr and Surtur, Tyr and Garmr, and ultimately Heimdall and Loki. Ragnarök, relentless in its devastation, would not pause for sorrow or triumph. Fate continued to weave its final strands on the blood-drenched plains of Vigridr. Chapter 15. Freyr versus Surtur. Smoke choked the twilight sky above Vigridr. The once golden realm of Asgard loomed in the background, ravaged by fire and strewn with the corpses of gods and monsters alike. Against this apocalyptic backdrop, the flame-wreathed figure of Surtur pressed deeper into the battlefield. His flaming sword radiated a fearsome heat, and molten embers drifted from his enormous frame. Freyr, the Vanir god of fertility and peace, had never relished warfare. Yet here he stood, face etched with sorrow and determination. He knew the prophecies. Surtur's destructive power would become unstoppable, eventually immolating all 9 worlds. If anyone was to slow that cataclysmic force, it fell to Freyr, though he possessed no proper sword. He had given his enchanted blade away long ago, an act of generosity or folly, depending on how one viewed it. Clutching the curved antler he'd fashioned into a makeshift weapon, Freyr inhaled sharply, calling upon the last vestiges of nature's magic. Though the land here was barren and torn, he channeled what remained of Midgard's life force, summoning a faint shimmer of greenery around his feet. Soft tendrils of living energy coiled up his legs, bolstering his spirit. Surtur approached, each massive step sending tremors through the blasted earth. Fire giants trailed behind him, but they parted to let their king confront Freyr alone. A deep, crackling laugh rumbled from Surtur's blackened throat. His sword, brighter than the sun, lit the gloom with a menacing glare. "You dare face me, little god?" Surtur's voice resonated like an inferno's roar. "Your forests, your crops, your gentle rains, they will all be ash soon enough." Freyr firmed his grip on the antler blade. "I stand for life, even in its final hour," he replied quietly. "If your flames must consume the world, let me at least try to shield what I can." As Freyr dashed forward, Surtur swung his colossal sword. It cut a fiery swath through the air, forcing Freyr to dive beneath the searing arc. The Vanir god rolled, pressing a hand to the earth. Green tendrils erupted around Surtur's feet, flowering vines that tried to ensnare his ankles. For a heartbeat, Surtur stumbled, momentarily hindered by the sudden growth. Yet with a roar, he unleashed a blast of scorching heat. The vines crisped into ash, curling away in a gust of superheated wind. Freyr squinted against the glare, sweat beading on his brow. Even standing near Surt was agonizing. His lungs burned with every breath. Yet he forced his battered body onward, slashing with the antler blade at Surtur's flank. Sparks showered from the impact, but the makeshift blade did little more than scratch Surtur's molten skin. Gritting his teeth, Freyr pressed in again, aiming for a gap beneath the fire giant's arm. Surtur twisted, meeting Freyr's strike with the flat of his blazing sword. The antler blade glowed red-hot under the heat, forcing Freyr to recoil, lest his weapon melt in his hands. With a casual sweep, Surtur smashed Freyr backward, sending the Vanir god tumbling into the mud. Freyr's breath caught in his throat as he landed painfully. The antler blade clattered away. The fire giant loomed over him, flames dancing in mocking triumph. Still, Freyr refused to yield. He invoked the Vanir's deep bond with nature. Though the land here was scorched, it retained a flicker of memory from more fertile ages. Straining every nerve, Freyr drew on that vestige of life. Beneath him, the earth cracked, and a single green shoot emerged. Its stem glimmered with fey luminescence, bending toward Freyr's outstretched hand. Seizing the shoot, Freyr poured his power into it. In an instant, the tiny sapling thickened into a sturdy vine, coiling up around his wrist and forming an improvised whip or lash. Rising to his feet, Freyr snapped the vine at Surtur's flaming torso. The lash hissed in the superheated air, glowing with a living energy that momentarily stung the fire giant. Surtur roared in surprise as the vine whip scored a shallow line across his chest, leaving a trail of smoldering embers. The giant's hand reflexively moved to shield the wound, but Surtur's fiery rage only grew more intense. The victory was fleeting. Surtur raised his blazing sword high, the flames intensifying until they were nearly white. The very air shimmered with lethal heat. Freyr braced himself, vine lash at the ready, but deep down he knew the prophecy. Without his enchanted blade, he stood little chance of toppling the Fire King. In a single, devastating stroke, Surtur brought the sword crashing down. Freyr managed to sidestep enough to avoid being cleaved in two, but the blade's explosive impact unleashed a wave of fire that consumed him. Freyr's anguished cry was lost to the roaring flames. The Vanir god fell to his knees, body seared. Fire raged around them. Surtur loomed, sword raised for a killing blow. Freyr's vision blurred as the intense heat burned through his armor, blistering his skin. In that final moment, his thoughts turned to the fields he once tended, the laughter of summer days, and the gentle rains that nourished the earth. He felt an ache not for himself, but for the world that would no longer know renewal. With merciless precision, Surtur delivered the final strike. The flaming blade pierced Freyr's chest, cutting through any lingering defenses. For a second, Freyr exhaled a soft sigh, a last breath carrying the faint scent of green leaves. Then he slumped, lifeless, into the scorched earth. A hush settled over that patch of the battlefield. Surtur pulled the blade free, leaving flames dancing atop Freyr's still form. Around them, fire giants cheered, their voices echoing in the inferno's glow. Another of Asgard's champions had fallen. Freyr's gentle gifts, summer's warmth, nature's fertility, would not shield the world from destruction. Triumphant, Surtur turned away, black eyes scanning the battlefield for new targets. Smoke wreathed him, glowing embers swirling in his wake. The ground beneath his footsteps smoldered, each imprint a reminder of the unstoppable inferno he carried. Though he had slain Freyr, Surtur's role in Ragnarok was far from over. The final conflagration awaited him, and his sword still glowed with apocalyptic potential. In the distance, the battered ranks of gods and Einherjar reeled from yet another grievous loss. The once shining pantheon had lost Odin, Thor, and now Freyr, one after the other. Yet the battle raged on. Even as Surtur strode away, a ferocious bark resonated through the tumult, drawing all eyes to a new duel, Tyr and Garmr. And beyond that still loomed Heimdall's final clash with Loki. Freyr's sacrifice, like Thor's, underscored the grim truth. Nobility and bravery could not halt destiny's inexorable advance. The world inched closer to its fiery end, and Surtur stood at the forefront, sword blazing with the doom of the 9 worlds. Chapter 16. Tyr versus Garmr. When Tyr first heard the savage howling rolling across Vigridr, a chill coursed through his veins. He knew that sound. It belonged to Garmr, the monstrous hound guarding the gates of hell. Legend said that when Garmr broke free of his chains, the end times were at hand. Now, here on the final battlefield, the beast prowled, muzzle dripping with unearthly saliva, eyes ablaze with malice. Though Tyr was the god of war, he wore a somber demeanor, his single hand, a reminder of Fenrir's treachery, clenched around the hilt of a short sword. He had lost his right hand in the act of binding Fenrir, sacrificing it to ensure the wolf's imprisonment. That memory weighed heavily on him, especially now that Fenrir had broken free, devouring Odin before meeting his own doom at Vidar's hands. Yet Tyr held no illusions. His destiny lay not with Fenrir, but with this other monstrous canid, Garmr. Garmr, more massive than any normal wolf, bounded through the carnage, leaving deep gouges in the muddy ground. Its feral growl rivaled thunder, and a chain dangled from its neck, snapped links rattling like a twisted trophy. As the hound approached, Tyr stepped away from the main fray, drawing Garmr's focus. Both combatants locked eyes. In them burned an ancient grudge. 2 guardians, 2 stalwart protectors, each representing opposing realms. One guarded the borders of hell, the other upheld the honor of Asgard. With a snarl, Garmr lunged. Jaws capable of splintering iron clamped down where Tyr's torso had been a moment before. But Tyr, agile despite his armor, sidestepped, sword flashing in a quick riposte. His blade sliced across Garmr's shoulder, drawing a line of black, smoking blood. Garmr roared in pain, spinning with eerie quickness for such a large beast, snapping again. Tyr ducked, rolling under the beast's snapping fangs. The air thickened with the tang of blood and the reek of hell's domain. Garmar's fur bristled, each hackle as stiff as a dagger. The monstrous hound bared its teeth, foam flecking its maw. Tyr exhaled, bracing his single hand on the pommel of his sword, ready for the next assault. They clashed in a whirlwind of fang and blade. Tyr's movements were measured, each strike aiming for vulnerable joints in the beast's hide. Still, it was an uphill struggle. Garmar's hide was thick, its reflexes keen. At one point, Garmar's claws raked Tyr's breastplate, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Tyr hissed in pain, stumbling backward, but refused to yield ground. Garmar loosed a baleful howl that echoed across the battlefield. The sound tugged at the hearts of the living, a chilling reminder of the unstoppable approach of death. Nearby combatants, giants, Einherjar, undead, glanced briefly at the savage duel, but were too enmeshed in their own fights to intervene. Tyr knew he couldn't rely on trickery or illusions. Such was never his style. He was a god of courage, of straightforward combat. Each time Garmar lunged, Tyr met the beast head-on. Sparks flew as sword met fang, and the ring of steel against bone reverberated. The stump of Tyr's missing hand ached with phantom pain, recalling that fateful day with Fenrir. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. This time, he would not be caught helpless. Summoning a surge of adrenaline, Tyr launched himself forward, slashing wildly. The blade carved a bloody furrow across Garmar's flank. A pained yelp escaped the hound, but it retaliated by snapping its jaws around Tyr's leg, crunching the armor plating. With a grimace, Tyr slammed his sword's pommel into Garmar's snout, forcing the jaws loose before they crushed his bones. Dark blood stained Tyr's greaves as he stumbled away, leg throbbing with fresh agony. The duel escalated. Snarling, Garmar circled Tyr, waiting for an opening. Tyr hobbled, favoring his wounded leg. The hound attacked again, jaws wide, but Tyr angled his blade in a desperate thrust, plunging steel into Garmar's open maw. The hound yelped, pinned momentarily by the sword, jaws clamped around the blade. Tyr twisted, hearing the grinding of teeth on metal. Blood spurted as Garmar tried to wrench free, but Tyr held fast. Yet Garmar's thrashing strength was immense. With a violent shake of its massive head, it tore the sword from Tyr's grip, snapping the blade in two. Tyr, now disarmed, recoiled. Garmar spat out the broken shards, foaming jaws still dripping with gore. Tyr's breathing came in ragged gulps. Pain radiated from his wounded leg, and sweat stung his eyes. Nonetheless, he refused to retreat. This was his fate, as spelled out in the ancient prophecies. Tyr and Garmar would destroy each other. He remembered hearing the skalds recite that stanza many times in Asgard's halls. Now the verse had come to life, and he would see it through. With a shout of raw determination, Tyr charged barehanded at the beast. Garmar lunged to meet him. Tyr flung himself aside at the last moment, ramming a shoulder into the hound's flank. They tumbled together, rolling in blood-soaked mud. Garmar snapped at Tyr's helm, biting a chunk of metal away. Tyr landed a fierce punch to Garmar's throat, momentarily cutting off the monster's growl. Scrambling atop the beast, Tyr thrust his left arm, his only arm, against Garmar's neck, pressing with all his might. Garmar snarled and twisted, but Tyr leaned into the chokehold. For a heartbeat, the monstrous hound's fiery eyes bulged, struggling to breathe. Then Garmar's claws raked across Tyr's side, ripping through armor and flesh. The god cried out, blood pouring from the deep wound. Still, he held firm, applying crushing force to Garmar's neck. Like two predators in a final death spiral, they tore at each other relentlessly. In a crescendo of violence, Garmar managed to lunge upward, biting into Tyr's shoulder, fangs sinking deep into muscle. Tyr gasped, but in that same moment, he twisted his body, snapping the hound's neck with a final surge of divine strength. A wet crack echoed through the air. Garmar's body went limp. Tyr, mortally wounded, slumped over the hulking corpse. Blood gushed from his shredded shoulder and gashed side. The color drained from his face as he fought for breath. Yet a grim satisfaction flickered in his eyes. Tyr lay still atop the lifeless Garmr, breath shallow. In those final heartbeats, his gaze drifted over the battlefield. He saw Surtur's flames, the silhouettes of frost giants, the battered lines of Einherjar. He thought of Odin, Fenrir, Thor, Freyr, all gone now. Then darkness closed around him. His last breath escaped in a low rasp, carrying his spirit into whatever lay beyond even the gods' understanding. The watchers at a distance saw the two great warriors lying motionless, locked in a grisly tableau. One more prophecy fulfilled. The swirling currents of Ragnarök cared nothing for triumph or tragedy, only the inexorable unraveling of all things. With Tyr and Garmr alike fallen, another critical piece in the cosmic tapestry was set. But the battle raged on. Over by the shattered Bifrost's remnants, Heimdall clashed with a cunning figure veiled in illusions, Loki. Their final meeting would mark another turning point in the Day of Doom. Chapter 17. Heimdall versus Loki. A brittle wind blew across the scorched earth, carrying ash and embers from Freyr's pyre and the battered remains of other fallen gods. The Bifrost lay shattered in the distance, its once rainbow sheen reduced to jagged shards. At that fractured edge of Vigridr, Heimdall confronted the sly figure who had orchestrated so many of the tragedies unfolding around them, Loki. Heimdall had ever been Asgard's sentinel, endowed with keen senses to guard the realm against threats. None was more threatening now than Loki, the trickster who had conspired in Baldur's death and unleashed chaos by freeing Fenrir and Jörmungandr. As if reflecting Heimdall's grim determination, the Gjallarhorn at his side seemed to vibrate in resonance with his heartbeat. Loki stood calmly, leaning on a curved dagger. Around him illusions flickered, shadows that mimicked his shape or danced at the corners of Heimdall's vision. His eyes glowed with unmasked cunning, though a flicker of regret or sadness occasionally broke his composure. If so, it was buried quickly beneath a smirk. "You've done well to survive, Watchman," Loki said, voice carrying a mocking lilt. "But we both know how this ends. I set the pieces in motion, and you, ever the loyal guard dog, must try to stop me." Heimdall raised his sword, ignoring the taunt. "Traitor," he spat, voice ringing with an undercurrent of wrath. "Your lies have cost us Baldur, Odin, and half the Pantheon. I will end this now." They circled each other, tense as coiled springs. Loki made the first move. With a flick of his hand, illusions sprang up, a mirage of multiple Lokis rushing forward, each brandishing a blade. Heimdall's keen senses scrambled to track the real threat. He slashed at the nearest doppelganger, which dissolved into smoke. Grinning Loki lunged from behind, dagger aiming for Heimdall's back. But the Watchman pivoted at the last second, sword meeting dagger in a ringing clash. Sparks flew, Loki's eyes narrowed. "Good reflexes, as always," he muttered. Heimdall pressed the advantage, driving Loki back with a flurry of rapid cuts. Each strike forced Loki to dodge or parry, illusions failing under Heimdall's unwavering gaze. Soon, the trickster found himself teetering at the edge of the shattered Bifrost, sharp shards jutting from the ground like jagged teeth. Loki feigned a stumble, luring Heimdall closer. Then, in a burst of shape-shifting magic, Loki transformed into a sleek serpent, slithering around Heimdall's legs. Before the Watchman could strike, Loki resumed his humanoid form behind him, aiming a lethal thrust at his spine. But Heimdall's preternatural sense caught the shift in air currents. Twisting aside, he evaded the blow. Steel flashed as he countered, slicing through a portion of Loki's arm. Blood spattered on the rainbow shards. Loki hissed in pain, illusions momentarily faltering. Enraged, the trickster god unleashed a surge of chaotic magic. The debris of the broken Bifrost lifted into the air, swirling around them. Prism-like shards whirled in a lethal dance, each rotating with razor-sharp edges. Heimdall braced himself, using Gjallarhorn to deflect some shards while slicing others with his sword. Both combatants bled from shallow cuts. Lightning flickered across the battlefield's distant skies, courtesy of Thor's final storm, though Thor himself had fallen. Surtur's flames glowed on another horizon. The entire realm was collapsing into chaos. They fought on, stepping precariously across slippery shards of the once holy bridge. Loki's illusions flickered, but Heimdall's focus never wavered. Each strike, each feint, each breath felt like the turning point of a cosmic struggle. At last, Heimdall forced Loki into a corner. The trickster's back was to a jagged precipice where part of the Bifrost had torn away. Shimmering emptiness yawned below, perhaps the void leading to Ginnungagap, the primordial gulf. A fleeting memory surfaced in Heimdall's mind, the mortal realm he had protected for so long, where men and women prayed to the Aesir for guidance. He recalled the farmland and forests, all blanketed now by Fimbul winter and the tidal floods. Their pleas echoed in his consciousness, urging him onward. He was the watchman, the guardian. He must see this to the end. Tightening his grip, Heimdall lunged forward with a combination of strikes aimed at Loki's torso. Loki parried desperately, illusions faltering under the relentless assault. One slash caught Loki across the chest, tearing leather and flesh. The trickster staggered, a snarl twisting his lips. "Even now," Loki gasped, "you cling to your righteous duty, but it's all ashes. Look around you. Asgard burns, Midgard drowns, Odin is gone. Why do you persist?" Heimdall's voice was hoarse with exertion. "Because it's what I was made to do," he said simply. "Because there's always something worth guarding." With a burst of desperate energy, Loki shot forward, dagger leading. Heimdall took a step back, but not quickly enough. Loki's blade found flesh, plunging into Heimdall's side. Pain flared, lightning hot. Nonetheless, the watchman didn't flinch. He locked his free arm around Loki's weapon hand, preventing the trickster from withdrawing. Summoning every last drop of strength, Heimdall drove his sword through Loki's chest. Blood spattered across them both. Loki's eyes widened in shock, illusions flickering wildly as his control slipped. The blade emerged from his back, dripping red onto the shards below. A trembling gasp escaped Loki's lips. They stood locked together, panting. Heimdall felt the dagger twisting in his side, blood pouring from the wound. Loki coughed, a weak laugh escaping him. "A fitting end, I suppose," he murmured. In that suspended heartbeat, neither could move. Then Heimdall's legs buckled. With a shared groan, the two gods toppled sideways, plunging off the jagged edge of the broken Bifrost. They vanished into the swirling void, locked in a fatal embrace, sword and dagger still embedded in each other's bodies. For a moment, the illusions dissipated entirely, revealing just two figures, one the eternal watchman, the other the eternal trickster, each undone by the other's blade. Their final act was to drag each other into oblivion, fulfilling another crucial prophecy. Heimdall and Loki would slay one another at Ragnarok. Silence draped that corner of the battlefield. Wind swept across the shards of the Bifrost, carrying faint echoes of the Watcher's last breath. None saw exactly how or where Loki and Heimdall landed, if indeed there was any land beneath them. They simply vanished, a swirl of dust and glittering glass marking their final stand. In that hush, it felt as though the cosmos itself exhaled. Another thread in the tapestry had snapped, two more gods gone. The watchers who glimpsed the end of the duel found themselves awed and shaken by the savage finality of their struggle. Yet Vigridr remained a maelstrom of blood and flame, Hel's armies, the frost giants, and the remnants of Asgard's defenders continued to clash. Above, Skul and Hati circled ever closer to the sun and moon, threatening to plunge the world into total darkness. Deprived of its greatest guardians, Asgard stood on the brink, ready to face the culminating events of Ragnarök. Chapter 18. Surtur's Final Blaze. The roar of battle on Vigridr had begun to subside, not because the fighting waned, but because so many combatants now lay dead or dying. The ground was heaped with carnage, the corpses of frost giants, the shattered remnants of Einherjar, and the still forms of fallen gods. Smoke choked the air. In the distance, Asgard's once majestic silhouette flickered behind pillars of flame. At the center of this destruction stood Surtur, the fire giant king. His sword, radiant beyond mortal comprehension, pulsed with scorching heat. Though he had slain Freyr, Surtur's role in Ragnarök was far from complete. The prophecies declared that Surtur would set the 9 worlds ablaze, sealing their doom. Embers and ash swirled around Surtur's imposing figure. Clad in armor that glowed like molten iron, he traversed the battlefield with deliberate steps. Wherever he passed, flames burst anew. Even the cold mists of Fimbulwinter retreated from his presence. Snowbanks hissed into steam, and patches of frost-laden earth turned to scorched mud. Some of the remaining Einherjar tried to rally against him, a desperate bid for one final stand. But Surtur swept them aside with a single swing of his blazing sword. The shockwave released by that swing toppled tents, shattered wooden fortifications, and ignited the very air. Warriors were flung like rag dolls, their armor clanging as they landed in the mud, lifeless or broken. A small cluster of Valkyries mustered enough courage to dive-bomb Surtur, lances aimed at his fiery head. Their war steeds shrieked as they braved the heat. For a moment, the Valkyries circled like hawks, looking for an opening. With a roar, Surtur unleashed a column of flame from the tip of his sword. The scorching pillar devoured 2 Valkyries in an instant, their bodies reduced to ash mid-flight. The rest scattered, wings singed, forced to retreat. Yet still, some defenders fought on. Hoenir, the silent god who had largely stayed at Odin's side, attempted a last-ditch magical assault alongside a handful of lesser-known Aesir. They shaped runic sigils in the air, forming shimmering barriers to slow Surtur's advance. The fire giant met these spells with an ever-increasing blaze, forging ahead as their runes fizzled and cracked. One after another, the defenders collapsed under the sheer onslaught. Having routed the last pockets of resistance on Vigridr, Surtur turned his gaze toward Asgard itself. Already the outer walls were crumbling from the earlier assaults by giants and undead. Gutted towers jutted into the sky like skeletal remains, their once polished stone blackened by soot. An eerie glow pervaded the realm, reflecting the fires that burned in every courtyard. Leading his surviving legion of fire giants, Surtur marched beyond the battered gates. The city's grand avenues were buried under rubble and fallen statues, golden roofs now twisted and melted, dripping streams of molten metal. The flames that danced around Surtur seemed to intensify in this final approach, as if the realm's pending doom fueled his power. One by one, the storied halls of Asgard fell. Fensalir, the palace of Frigg, collapsed in a cascade of flaming timbers. Vingolf, once a meeting place for the gods, crumbled beneath a torrent of molten slag. Even Valhalla, where countless warriors had feasted awaiting this very day, could not withstand Surtur's march. Its high walls cracked and tumbled, allowing the unstoppable flames inside. In that sacred hall, countless empty seats lay overturned, the tables smashed. The Einherjar, who had not already perished on the battlefield, had few places left to rally. Some tried to hold Valhalla's entrance, but Surtur's legion crushed them like brittle leaves. Soon, The feasting benches were reduced to charcoal and smoke, signifying the end of a tradition that had spanned ages. Standing amidst the wreckage, Surtur raised his sword high. Flames roiled around its blade, forming a swirling vortex of incandescent fury. Sparks erupted skyward, merging with the smoky firmament. The entire realm trembled at the fire giant's command. It was as though the cosmic boundaries themselves wavered, trembling before the force that would consume them. A wave of pure heat radiated outward from Surtur's epicenter. Towers that still stood were instantly set ablaze from bottom to top. Rivers of flame rippled across Asgard's plazas, devouring every remnant of civilization. Even the bedrock beneath Asgard's foundations began to glow, turning into molten slag. The realm had been the seat of divine power for countless millennia, and now, in mere moments, Surtur's final blaze wiped it clean. Surtur paused, scanning the destruction with grim satisfaction. The deed he was born to do was nearly done. He knew, too, that his role did not end with Asgard. All the 9 worlds were to be purged in the ultimate conflagration. As if sensing the clock of destiny ticking, Surtur turned his gaze toward the broader cosmos. High above, the sky was rent by ominous shadows. Skull and Hati, the ravenous wolves, drew ever closer to devouring the sun and moon. Light flickered uncertainly, shifting between a smoky twilight and near total darkness. Surtur felt the cosmic tension building like a drum roll, the final notes of the symphony of doom. As Asgard's last spires collapsed in an avalanche of fire and rubble, Surtur strode back through the broken gates, heading toward the broader battlefield of the 9 worlds. The remaining fire giants followed in his wake, leaving Asgard's ruin behind them, a silent testament to the unstoppable force of prophecy. Smoke and ash trailed off into the distance, merging with the blackened sky. Lightning still flashed occasionally, a ghostly echo of Thor's final storm. The seas roiled with Jormungandr's venomous legacy. Everywhere, chaos reigned, yet Surtur's presence seemed to overshadow it all. A faint hiss of steam escaped the charred ground beneath his feet, as if the land itself gasped in pain. Surtur angled his blade skyward, the swirling fires around it intensifying. In a voice that sounded like a volcanic eruption, he intoned words in the language of primordial giants, calling on the final cataclysm. From across the various realms, Jotunheim, Alfheim, even Hel, those who still survived felt the tremor in the spiritual fabric. Some turned eyes to the horizon, glimpsing the ruddy glow that signaled Surtur's approach. Others merely cowered or prayed, hopeless before an inferno that offered no mercy. Thus, with Asgard laid to waste, Surtur readied to complete his role in Ragnarok, the burning of every corner of existence. All that remained was for the final triggers, the devouring of sun and moon, the fracturing of the world's crust, before Surtur's sword would bring total annihilation. The next chapter of doom was about to unfold, carrying the 9 worlds to their destined end. Chapter 19. World consumed by fire and water. A stifling hush gripped the cosmos, as if every realm held its breath for a final, devastating blow. All around, the battle on Vigridr had devolved into scatterings of desperate skirmishes. Only a handful of gods and warriors still fought. Everyone else had either fled, died, or been subsumed by the carnage. Above them, the skies turned ever darker, lit only by lurid fires and sporadic lightning. A collective gasp rippled through the survivors when it finally happened. High in the firmament, Skjöll, the wolf who chased the sun, at last caught his prey. With a growl that shook heaven and earth, Skjöll snapped his jaws around the sun, extinguishing its radiance in a single, dreadful moment. Daylight vanished, replaced by an otherworldly gloom. Simultaneously, Hati overtook the moon. The great wolf lunged, swallowing the pale orb whole. The stars winked out as if in terror. An impenetrable darkness fell, blanketing the 9 worlds in a perpetual night. The howls of Skuld and Hati rang out in triumph, echoing across every realm with dreadful finality. In that instant, a new level of despair seized the living. Mortals in Midgard, if any remained, could no longer distinguish day from night. Cities and villages lay in rubble, their inhabitants cowering in half-collapsed shelters. The temperature, once dominated by Fimbul winter's chill, turned erratic. Surges of heat from Surtur's flames now clashed with icy gusts from Jotunheim's lingering storms. Those who peered skyward saw nothing but swirling smoke and the vague outlines of 2 monstrous wolves prowling the firmament. There was no sun or moon to guide them, no hint of starlight to break the oppressive gloom. Free from the cosmic lights that once balanced creation, Surtur's sword glowed even more fiercely, as if fueled by the final darkness. A ferocious roar swept across the realms when he raised it high, unleashing an inferno that cascaded into every corner of existence. Rivers vaporized under the intense heat, mountains cracked, and forests ignited in towering wildfires that spanned entire continents. Midgard seas boiled, coastal regions collapsing into superheated steam. The battered coastline that had once seen Naglfar's launching was now a cauldron of roiling water and venom. The mixture of Jörmungandr's poison and Surtur's flames producing toxic vapors that choked the atmosphere. Across the Bifrost's shattered remnants, the fragments of Asgard continued to burn, descending into molten slag. Even the sturdiest realms, like the rocky expanses of Svartalfheim, cracked under the unstoppable pressure. Rivers of lava burst through fissures, merging with Surtur's inferno. In Alfheim, the homeland of the Light Elves, once pristine forests blazed in a radiant pyre. The elves, those who had not perished, fled in vain for refuge. Jotunheim's glaciers melted into raging torrents, fueling the rising seas that threatened to swallow everything. The cosmic boundaries frayed, realms overlapping in chaotic floods of flame and water. Amid the choking darkness and swirling smoke, another force rose to meet Surtur's flames, a deluge driven by the thrashing remains of Jörmungandr and the meltdown of Jotunheim's ice. Tidal waves, some the size of mountains, crashed across Midgard and spilled into the adjoining realms through cracked portals. A swirling chaos of fire and water ensued, each element devouring entire landscapes. Mortals, dwarves, elves, and even some giants were caught in the middle of these extremes, burned alive or drowned, depending on which side of the cataclysm reached them first. For a while, massive pillars of steam soared into the night sky as towering walls of water collided with Surtur's scorching fires, producing a hiss like the roaring of 1,000,000 dragons. Sheltered within a cave in Midgard's highest mountains, a handful of survivors clung to hope. They watched in horror as a tsunami of flame-laced water surged through distant valleys. The thunderous approach rattled the ground beneath them. Some prayed to gods who no longer answered, while others huddled together in silent resignation. This was the promised end, and no illusions of safety could endure. Down in the floodwaters, half submerged, the corpse of Jörmungandr drifted, still exuding venom. Pieces of Fenrir's remains washed past, the wolf's gigantic form broken apart by floods and battlefield carnage. The air stank of decay and chaos. Here and there, battered skeletons of frost giants jutted from the debris, arms reaching skyward in a final frozen plea. Occasional flashes of lightning still split the darkness, relics of Thor's final storms. The flashes illuminated a world in ruin. Surtur's flaming silhouette loomed against the watery horizon, while wave after wave scoured the land bare. Ash drifted in thick clouds, falling like gray snow. The thunder echoed emptily, as though the sky itself wept for what had been lost. From Muspelheim's realm of fire, more legions of flame giants continued to spill forth, but many were swept away by the unstoppable floods. The clash of extremes magnified the destruction. No side truly won, for everything was consumed in the end. And then the final blow arrived. The combined weight of flame and flood fractured the core of Midgard itself. In an apocalyptic quake, the landmass began to sink. Mountains crumbled, valleys collapsed, and entire continents disappeared beneath the raging waters. Surtur, perched atop a jagged pinnacle of rock, thrust his sword downward in one last act of cosmic fury. An inferno so intense that it seemed to burn reality itself erupted, searing the remnants of earth and sky. The shock wave shattered what was left of the realm's foundation. Finally, the ground gave way entirely, plunging into the swirling waters. Tsunamis converged from every side, swallowing the land in a single, monumental surge. In the hush that followed, Surtur's final blaze met the ocean depths. Steam soared miles into the black sky, forming clouds heavy with scalding vapor. The conflagration that devoured the surface was itself drowned, the flames extinguished beneath titanic waves. Only swirling embers persisted for a few moments, dancing on the floodwaters before winking out, leaving nothing but darkness and the hiss of dying heat. The entire world was now submerged. The final moment was one of near total silence, broken only by the hiss and crackle of superheated water. What had been plains, mountains, cities, or palaces lay under fathoms of swirling ocean, peppered with debris, corpses, and ashes. Skjöll and Hati had done their part. Surtur had played his. Fire and flood had merged in a cataclysm that consumed almost all life. Above this drowned realm, only an endless night remained, for the sun and moon were gone. Thus ended the epoch of the 9 worlds as they once were, in fire, water, and darkness. Nothing seemed to survive, yet the cosmos held its breath, for even the darkest prophecy contained a seed of rebirth. Chapter 20. Silence and Darkness. After the final upheaval, an uncanny stillness settled. The swirling waters that had devoured Midgard and Asgard gradually calmed, their surface growing eerily placid, though debris occasionally broke the mirror-like expanse. No wind stirred, no bird sang, no sun, no moon, no stars, only impenetrable blackness blanketed the heavens. It felt as if the cosmos itself had paused, exhausted from the violence of Ragnarök. All realms had suffered. Jotunheim's glaciers melted into the global flood, Alfheim's forests scorched to cinders, and the once grand halls of Asgard obliterated beneath molten slag and churning seas. Even the hidden domains, Hel's underworld, Nidavelir's dwarven forges, were rattled to their cores by the cataclysmic collapse. An observer floating in that endless darkness would sense a profound emptiness. The usual cosmic hum, the background chorus of living worlds, was gone. Life, for the most part, had been snuffed out in the colliding extremes of Surtur's flame and Jörmungandr's floods. Rocks glowed faintly in the deep, cooled remnants of Surtur's fury, sinking ever deeper into the ocean floor. In the silence, echoes of the past lingered. One might imagine the laughter of gods in Asgard's feasting halls, the clang of practiced swords in Valhalla, or the gentle rustle of leaves in Midgard's forests. But these were only memories, drifting like phantoms through the endless night. Those who once sang songs and told tales were now silent, their voices lost in the watery grave. Odin's sacrifice, Thor's bravery, Freyr's devotion, Tyr's steadfast honor, Heimdall's watchfulness, Loki's cunning, each played out as spectral images in the cosmic hush. If a single soul remained conscious to witness the aftermath, it might weep at the emptiness. Deep beneath the ocean, the boundary between Hel's domain and the mortal realm had shattered in places. Souls that once dwelled under Hel's watch found themselves adrift, uncertain where death ended and oblivion began. Some, perhaps, dissolved entirely in the swirling energies of Ragnarök. Others floated aimlessly, intangible remnants of broken fate. Hel herself, wounded by the collapse of her realm's gates, might have vanished or retreated into the deeper recesses of whatever dimension remained. Without the cosmic order, the underworld structure faltered. The entire cycle of life, death, and rebirth had come unspooled like a cut thread. Above, Skull and Hati no longer prowled the sky, having sated their cosmic hunger. In devouring the sun and moon, they too seemed to fulfill their purpose, fading into the blackness with no celestial lights left to chase. A few luminous sparks might have been distant stars or perhaps illusions conjured by the swirling after-effects of creation's demise. But for all practical purposes, it was a starless void. In this absolute darkness, time felt meaningless. Seconds, hours, years. No mortal or divine measure remained to track them. The newly formed global ocean stretched endlessly, lifeless, under the hush of an extinguished sky. Occasionally, a faint glow might emerge from a chunk of molten rock, cooling in the depths, but it offered no lasting illumination. One might have imagined the last watchers of the old cosmos drifting on makeshift rafts, but there were none. The scale of destruction left no pockets of normal existence. Even if a few had survived by some divine intervention, they would be isolated specks in a near-infinite desert of water and darkness. The hush that enveloped the nine worlds felt like a cosmic lament, a hush of mourning for an epoch ended. Yet prophecy foretold that this silence was not permanent. From ancient runes to the verses of seers, even the darkest accounts of Ragnarök hinted at a glimmer of rebirth once all was said and done. Still, for the immediate moment, the notion of rebirth was unimaginable. Surtur's conflagration had done its work, and the seas had snuffed out any vestiges of flame. The world was now a drowned, charred husk, floating in an endless cosmic void. Fate demanded a pause here, a sacred stillness, before the next cycle could begin. Deep beneath the water's surface, secret forces stirred. Perhaps it was the faint pulse of Yggdrasil's roots, still clinging to existence in some hidden corner. Or maybe it was the last trace of Baldur's spirit, waiting to re-emerge. The seeds of new life, literal or metaphorical, remained buried in the cosmic substrate. No ear could hear that subtle stirring, no eye could witness the shimmer in the watery darkness. But it was there, a soft potential, waiting for the right moment to awaken. For even in the final lines of prophecy it was written, "After the fire, after the flood, the earth shall rise anew." And so time passed in a world lost to shadow. The colossal ocean stretched without a single wave, a mirror of the endless night above. The hush was so profound that the faintest ripple would have resonated like thunder. But there were no ripples, just the calm of absolute oblivion, the breath after total destruction, and before the first sigh of creation. In that silent span, one could almost see the universe hold a vigil. The nine worlds, once teeming with gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and mortals, had arrived at their lowest ebb. No watchers, no guardians, no tricksters, no beasts, only the memory of them, echoing in the cosmic tapestry that lay in tatters. Yet hope, though unseen, still dwelled in the prophecies. And as the black waters stretched on in unbroken stillness, the first faint glimmers of a new dawn, distant, almost imperceptible, began to gather like embers in the ashes of a long-dead fire. Nothing could be rushed. The cycle demanded that annihilation be complete before renewal could begin. Thus ended the final destruction of Ragnarök, a perfect silence in a drowned, sunless void, pregnant with the faint promise that even after the deepest darkness, life might find a way to awaken once more. Chapter 21. A New World Emerges. It began with the faintest stir. In the all-encompassing darkness, no wind blew, no waves lapped, and yet from the silent depths, something shifted. Perhaps it was a subtle vibration in the cosmic fabric, the faint hum of creation remembering its own rhythms. Then, in a moment that defied mortal measure, the waters rippling across the drowned earth receded. A shimmering line formed on the horizon, barely perceptible at first. Had there been watchers, they would have thought it a mirage, but slowly the line brightened, revealing what appeared to be a distant shore. This shore was not the shattered continents of the old world, but something fresh and vital. From beneath the brackish floodwaters, new land rose. Black silt and green tendrils intertwined, forming lush soil as though nature, purified by cataclysm, was birthing itself anew. Steam wafted off this emerging expanse, the residue of Surtur's fires still echoing in its core. Overhead, the black sky began a subtle shift in color, no longer the oppressive void, but a softer, smoky gray that hinted at the possibility of light. No trumpets or horns welcomed this resurrection. It was quiet, organic, and undeniably profound. The ocean parted in places, leaving behind rivulets that drained into newly formed rivers. Hills and valleys emerged from what had once been a uniform stretch of endless flood. Seeds, somehow preserved during the destruction, settled into the fresh soil, taking root with astonishing swiftness. Buds appeared on newly sprouted saplings, their leaves unfolding in the hazy air. In a remarkable display of nature's resilience, grasses spread across the damp ground. Flowers of unknown species, vibrant and delicate, bloomed in clusters. Creepers climbed embryonic cliffs that rose from the sea. This was a land without a name, no longer Midgard, not quite the old earth. It was something else, a clean slate. Amid the gray sky, a faint glow materialized. A newborn sun, destined to follow the path of the devoured sun, peeked out from behind rolling clouds. Though it was smaller and paler than its predecessor, its light was warm and comforting. It was as if the cosmos, realizing the old sun was lost, sparked a new celestial orb in its place. This nascent sun cast gentle beams upon the forming land, gradually evaporating the lingering mists. With the sunrise came the first hints of life's rebirth. Tiny insects skittered across stones. Birds in small flocks took flight from nowhere, their calls echoing over the green shoots. Even the waters lapping at the fresh shores glowed with a softer hue, as if cleansed of the venom that once poisoned them. Beneath the new soil, Yggdrasil persisted in some mysterious way. Though the cosmic tree had endured the full trauma of Ragnarok, its branches scorched, its bark split, some hidden root or seed remained, channeling life into the infant earth. Occasional glimpses of its presence manifested in the form of pale, otherworldly roots snaking just below the surface, or ephemeral motes of golden light drifting in the air. These motes collected like dew on fresh leaves, suggesting that Yggdrasil, or what remained of it, had chosen to nourish this new realm. Stark silence accompanied this regeneration. No armies marched, no gods clashed, no giants roared. The roiling horrors that once dominated the nine worlds were absent. In their place, a cautious harmony unfolded, each element, soil, water, sky, cooperating in a soft dance. For the first time in what felt like eternity, a calm pervaded. Now and then the brittle remains of the old world surfaced, a chunk of charred wood, perhaps once part of a mighty hall, a twisted piece of iron from a warrior's shield, a scrap of fabric floating ashore. These relics told silent stories of the cataclysm past, soon to be overgrown by the unstoppable tide of new life. Not a single divine figure walked these fields. Odin, Thor, Freyr, Tyr, Heimdall, Loki, all fallen in Ragnarok. One might wonder if any god survived at all. For the moment, the land lay free of towering footprints or colossal beasts. Even the distant horizon, framed by nascent forests and gentle slopes, showed no sign of monstrous silhouettes. It was as if the universe had turned the page, leaving behind the epic battles to pen a more tranquil chapter. And yet, prophecy held that not all deities would perish. Certain names lingered in the old verses: Vidar, Vali, Modi, Magni, Balder, Höder, foretelling a role in the new dawn. Whether they would emerge now or later remained to be seen. For the time being, the earth's fresh face seemed to belong to no one but the quietly expanding tapestry of nature. As the new sun climbed higher, its mild rays fell upon glittering dew. Grass blades stood tall, their droplets reflecting tiny rainbows. A mild breeze whispered through the budding groves. If a traveler from the old world could see this land, they might think it the purest paradise, unscarred by war or sorrow. Some small creatures, rabbits or foxes reborn in miniature form, darted among the greenery. Where they came from, how they survived the destruction, was a mystery that might never be explained. Perhaps Yggdrasil's hidden magic conjured them from nothingness, or they emerged from hidden pockets. Whatever the cause, their existence cemented the sense of a world truly rejuvenated. Though the transformation was dramatic, it also felt deliberate, as if some grand cosmic caretaker arranged each blade of grass, each seedling, to ensure the environment could sustain eventual inhabitants. The quiet hush suggested an anticipation, like a stage set for the entrance of new actors. Somewhere in the distance, the fresh waters gurgled along rocky channels, as if inviting the first explorers to arrive and drink from their purity. Indeed, this new world was about to receive its first visitors, gods who survived Ragnarok, mortals hidden away, souls returning from hell's domain. The earth was green again, radiant and unspoiled by the old grudges. From the vantage of prophecy, everything was precisely as foretold, yet also layered with an element of wonder, as though even fate itself was awed by nature's resilience. In that quiet realm, chapter 21 of the Grand Saga closed. The stage was set for the survivors, human and divine, to step into the dawn. A gentle sun shone on the lush rebirth, and the promise of a new age hovered in every breeze. Chapter 22. Survivors, Humans, and Gods. Amid the verdant quiet that now cloaked the earth, figures began to stir, some mortal, some divine. While countless lives were lost during Ragnarok, a chosen few had found refuge or possessed enough fortune to endure. These survivors emerged onto the green, dewy land, blinking in the newborn sun as though re-entering a dream. First among them were two humans, Leif and Lifthrasir, whose names meant life and eager for life. Throughout the cataclysm, they had hidden within a secret grove, possibly deep under the protection of Yggdrasil's remaining roots. Sheltered from Surtur's flames and Jörmungandr's floods, they sustained themselves on morning dew and the faint glimmer of hope that a new age would dawn. Now, stepping from the grove, they gazed in astonishment at the reborn earth. At their feet, lush grasses stretched to every horizon, fresh and cool against their skin. Overhead, the new sun bathed them in gentle warmth. Their eyes glowed with wonder, and tears slipped down Liv's cheeks as she realized the world was no longer a battlefield, but a peaceful domain waiting to be nurtured. Lifthrasir let out a shaky laugh, disbelief mingling with joy. The story said we would be the seed of humanity, he murmured, but I never dared to hope. Leif nodded, heart pounding with gratitude and a surge of determination. Let us make good on that promise, she said softly. Far across the budding fields, Vidar and Vali appeared. Sons of Odin, they had survived the cataclysm that claimed their father. Vidar, known for avenging Odin by slaying Fenrir, bore a stoic expression. The sole of his colossal shoe, crafted to withstand the wolf's jaws, remained attached to his foot, though spattered in dried blood and ash. Vali, quieter and more contemplative, walked beside him, eyes scanning the green horizon. They carried the weight of grief for lost kin, yet a faint glimmer of hope lit their gazes. The land, so vibrantly alive, welcomed their footsteps. Each blade of grass that bent under their sandals rose again, a testament to resilience. "A world without father, without Thor," Vali began. Vidar placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "But a world nonetheless. We must honor them by helping it thrive." Their voices carried softly over the meadow. The clarity of the new air seemed to magnify sound, as if nature, too, listened intently. Not far away, Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, also stepped onto the reborn earth. Burly and brimming with raw energy, they still wore scraps of armor from the final battle. Magni clutched the handle of Mjolnir, which he had inherited when Thor fell to Jormungandr's venom. The hammer's surface was battered, but arcs of dormant thunder energy flickered faintly, as though recognizing a new master. Modi, equally imposing, surveyed the quiet land with a certain restlessness. "I feel Father's absence in every breath," he said, voice gruff, "like a missing bolt of thunder in my chest." Magni nodded, hoisting Mjolnir. "We'll forge new storms when needed," he replied. "The world still needs guardians." Together, they exuded a fierce devotion to carry on Thor's legacy, protecting humanity and maintaining balance in this fragile, renewing realm. By threads of fate or gentle coincidence, the surviving gods converged in a clearing not far from Leif and Lifthrasir's sheltering grove. The mortals, startled to see towering deities, stood in awe. Though once humans might have trembled at the presence of gods, this moment was different, a shared hush of gratitude and humility. Vidar inclined his head to the mortal pair. "So it is true," he said, voice resonating with solemn reverence. "Humans have survived after all." Leif swallowed hard, then gathered her courage. "We are here to carry on, if the world allows it." Vali gave a small smile. "You two are more vital than ever. Come, walk with us. We are the keepers of a new dawn." Modi and Magni watched from a short distance, their expressions touched by curiosity. The echo of Thor's protective spirit rose in them at the sight of these vulnerable humans who might become the seed of a new human lineage. Magni tapped Mjolnir against the ground, sparks flickering. Perhaps an unspoken vow formed in his heart to shield these mortals, as his father once shielded the entire Midgard. No fanfare or ceremony marked this gathering. It was simply a confluence of survivors. Yet in that modest clearing, the mortal and the divine recognized a shared purpose, to nurture the new world. Some short conversation passed between them. Leif and Lifthrasir described the nightmares they'd seen from their hidden refuge, the fire on the horizon, the flooding waters, the roaring storms. Vidar related how Odin fell, how the realm of the gods collapsed in flames, and how he tore Fenrir's jaw asunder as vengeance. Modi and Magni, still grieving, spoke haltingly of Thor's last stand, cherishing his memory even as they strove to be worthy successors. The more they talked, the more the tension in the air dissolved. Beneath their sorrow, each being recognized a glimmer of hope. The earth was green again. How miraculous! Seeds sprouted in mere hours. Fruit blossoms appeared on slender branches. If life regenerated this swiftly, perhaps wounds of the heart could heal just as well. Vidar turned to the mortals. "We gods can protect, can guide, but the land is yours to till and thrive upon. Your children will flourish here, free from the shadow of the old wars." Leif placed a hand over her heart, voice trembling with earnestness. "We will remember what was lost and honor the gods who died, but we'll also build something beautiful and peaceful." Not all survivors had surfaced yet. Freya's fate was uncertain. She was never explicitly foretold to die, yet she hadn't appeared alongside the others. Some whispered that she might still walk in hidden meadows, guiding the new fertility. Balder and Höder, prophesied to return from Hel, were not yet seen, though their arrival was rumored to be a key sign of the new age. Even so, the group in the clearing sensed that more survivors might emerge in time. "We must explore," Magni suggested. "Find out if any others walk this realm. We should build a hall, for memory, for refuge." A calm nod passed among them. The notion of building anew struck like a spark enkindling. Once the Aesir had shaped entire worlds. Now these few survivors would start smaller, learning from the mistakes that led to Ragnarok. Perhaps they'd lay foundations of unity rather than conquest. A gentle breeze stirred the meadow, causing the tall grasses to shimmer in the nascent sunlight. In that rustling sound, one could almost hear the departed gods whisper blessings for the future. The group parted ways briefly to gather resources, promising to meet again in this spot. Vidar and Vali ventured east, Modi and Magni to the west, Leif and Lifthrasir northward, seeking a freshwater spring they glimpsed in the distance. Such was the dawn of a new alliance between mortal resilience and divine guardianship. The world lay open before them, a puzzle of fertile soil and uncharted forests, waiting for gentle hands to sow seeds of civilization. In the hush of Chapter 22, they took their first steps toward forging a hopeful future. Soon more changes would unfold, ones that might include the return of Balder, the shining god, and the final blessings that would seal this land's destiny. Chapter 23. Balder and Höder return. A few days passed, if one could measure days in this unfamiliar sun. During that time, the new world settled into a serene rhythm. Small huts rose where the survivors gathered. Livestock, seemingly conjured from nature's hidden reserves, appeared in sheltered clearings. Birds nested in the thick branches of freshly grown oaks. All was peaceful, with no sign of cosmic threats or monstrous beasts. Then, on a mist-laden morning, Vidar felt a subtle stirring in the air. He and Vali were trekking across a lush hillside to see if it might be suitable for farmland. As the sun's rays cut through the pale fog, a warm gust rustled the newly sprouted trees. Within that breeze, Vidar swore he heard quiet laughter, soft as a distant memory, yet unmistakable in its gentleness. Startled, he halted. Vali noticed the sudden pause and frowned. "What is it, brother?" Vidar lifted a hand, listening. The laughter floated again, barely audible, and then it faded. Without a word, Vidar broke into a sprint toward the source, leaves and branches brushing against his arms. The hillside dipped into a small glade where a pristine pond glimmered. At the edge of the pond stood two silhouettes, one radiant, the other quietly stoic. Balder, fair of face, golden-haired, shining with an inner light, and Höder, blind yet poised with an air of calm. Both had been lost in Hel's domain after the tragedy that sparked Ragnarök. Now they stood as though stepping out of a dream. "Balder!" Vidar exclaimed, breath catching in his throat. For so long, the shining god's death had symbolized the end of Asgard's innocence. Yet here he was, intact, unscarred, and emanating a gentle aura. Tears welled in Vidar's eyes unbidden. Beside him, Vali whispered, "It's true. The prophecies were real. You've returned." Balder's gaze shone with warmth. "And so have you, dear brothers," he said softly. He stepped forward, arms extended. The gods embraced, the relief and joy palpable in the hush of the glade. Even Höder, though sightless, approached with cautious steps, guided by the sound of his brothers' voices and footfalls. When their embrace parted, Balder placed a hand on each brother's shoulder. Ragnarök took so much, yet it seems fate had mercy enough to let some of us rekindle what was lost. Vali nodded, eyes shining with reverence. "We will rebuild, brother. The world is new, green and pure." Hoder, whose inadvertent action, aided by Loki's deceit, had caused Baldur's death, lingered somewhat apart, uncertainty clouding his face. At times he still wore the guilt of that ancient tragedy, even though the new age offered a chance for absolution. Baldur turned to him, radiating gentle compassion. "Brother, those sorrows belong to the past. If I could forgive you even in death, I do so again now." Hoder's expression softened. He exhaled, as though releasing a burden he'd carried too long. "Thank you, Baldur," he murmured. "If we truly stand in a new world, let it be free from old guilt." After these heartfelt greetings, Vidar and Vali led Baldur and Hoder to the makeshift village forming near the center of the realm. When Modi and Magni saw Baldur, they let out triumphant whoops. Modi bounded forward to clasp Baldur's hand. Even Magni, usually reserved, broke into a wide grin. "You live again," Modi exclaimed, beaming. "Father would be proud. The Aesir's beacon of light returns." Baldur smiled, placing a comforting palm on Modi's shoulder. "Thor's spirit endures in you both," he said. "I sense it. The world may have lost his thunder, but you are the echo that keeps us strong." When Leif and Lifthrasir beheld Baldur's radiance, they knelt in awe. They had grown up on tales of the shining god, and now saw him in the flesh. Baldur, humble in his renewed life, knelt as well, lifting them gently by the arms. "You have nothing to bow for," he said, voice as soothing as a summer breeze. "It is we who owe you thanks. Your resilience will fill this realm with your children and their children, ensuring the cycle of life continues." Tears glistened in Leif's eyes. "Lord Baldur, it's an honor to meet you," she whispered. "We thought all the gods were gone." "A few of us remain," Baldur replied, glancing at the small assembly of deities. "But let us remember that this world belongs to both mortals and gods, working together for harmony." As news of Baldur's return spread among the scattered survivors, divine and mortal alike, a spontaneous celebration began. It was neither grand nor lavish. Indeed, they had no grand halls or boundless feasts. But they had fresh fruit gathered from the orchard-like groves, fish from the streams, and newly purified water. Around a modest fire, they shared these simple gifts, laughter blending with the crackle of flames. Though no mead flowed in bottomless horns, the heartfelt camaraderie sparkled like gold. Modi and Magni told stories of Thor's heroic deeds, drawing chuckles and tears in equal measure. Vali recounted how Fenrir had been slain, a solemn tale that ended with him and Vidar remembering Odin's sacrifice. And Baldur, with a gentle light in his eyes, spoke of the love and forgiveness that might define this new era. One moment stood out. Hoder approached the group, uncertain if he should partake in the merriment, haunted by memories of Baldur's demise in the old world. Baldur noticed at once, standing to guide his blind brother's hand to a seat near the fire. "Stay with us," Baldur said softly, voice carrying no judgment. Hoder sat, shoulders sagging in relief. For the first time in ages, he felt accepted, free from the shadow of that tragic arrow of mistletoe. The onlookers, mortal and divine, sensed the healing that took place in that simple gesture. When the fire died down, Baldur rose, feeling a surge of warmth from within. He lifted his hands, and a gentle glow emanated from his palms, washing over the assembled crowd. The glow expanded like a dome, spreading across the land. Where it passed, leaves seemed greener, flowers more vibrant, the air more fragrant. It was as if Baldur's renewed essence blessed the world itself, embedding in it an echo of his radiance. All present watched in wonder. In the old days, Baldur's beauty had been admired, but overshadowed by the boisterous feats of gods like Thor or Odin's grand strategies. Now his quiet illumination felt like the perfect guiding light for an age that sought peace over conflict, growth over war. When the glow settled, the realm around them seemed even more alive, fruit trees bearing ripe gifts, birds singing lilting melodies, the soil practically humming with fertility. The group gazed at one another, spirits lifted. Ragnarok had battered them, yet they endured. Now, with Baldur's presence and the unity of gods and mortals, hope blossomed in every corner. In that peaceful hush, a new day broke. Chapter 23 closed on a panorama of survivors united under a benign sun, guided by Baldur's gentle leadership, reinforced by the strength of Vidar, Vali, Modi, Magni, and cherished by the hearts of Lif and Lifthrasir. Old grudges had died with the broken realms. New life beckoned. The stage was set for the final chapters of this saga, where the surviving gods would gather on Idavöllr, forging a realm free from the evils that once plagued them, ensuring that the horrors of Ragnarok would remain a distant memory in the shining dawn of a new world. Chapter 24. The Gathering on Idavöllr. Word of Baldur and Hudr's return spread swiftly among the scattered survivors. In fields turned lush and valleys newly formed, small enclaves of mortals and lesser deities had sprouted like seedlings. Over the days they received a beckoning dream or a quiet whisper on the wind. Come to Idavöllr. The ancient site, once located at Asgard's heart, would be the assembly point for a renewed pantheon and any who still believed in unity after the cataclysm. Idavöllr, long revered in stories, had been ground zero for the worst of Surtr's fury. After Ragnarok, it seemed certain that only a charred crater remained. But as the earth re-emerged, shaped by Yggdrasil's lingering magic, Idavöllr rose anew from the soot. Fresh grass blanketed its broad expanse, while wildflowers sparkled in the morning light. The land was flat and expansive, a perfect meeting ground untouched by the scars of old battles. A faint breeze rustled the blossoms, which swayed like colorful ribbons across the plain. In the distance, the faint outline of young forests ringed the horizon. Baldur sensed a gentle energy in the soil, a memory perhaps of the ancient glories once hosted here. He breathed deeply, feeling the plain's welcome. On a sunlit morning, one by one, or in small groups, survivors converged on Idavöllr. Lif and Lifthrasir arrived early, traveling on foot, hands clasped. Their eyes were wide, full of reverence for a place they'd only known in myth. Behind them came a modest band of mortals who had emerged from hidden shelters. Farmers, hunters, and healers, each carried the seeds of a future civilization. Soon, the divine survivors appeared. Vidar and Vali led the way, guiding a few of the reclusive Aesir who had lingered in far corners. Modi and Magni bounded in next, accompanied by the crackle of Mjolnir, which Magni bore across his broad shoulders. They greeted Baldur and Hudr with respectful nods, forging a circle of shining gods where none had stood mere weeks before. Even lesser-known goddesses and gods trickled in, figures who had survived by chance or cunning. Some were too grief-stricken to speak of the old days, but Baldur's quiet warmth drew them into conversation. Cries of joy and tears of remembrance mingled in the clear air, forging a sense of camaraderie no one had felt since Ragnarok's darkest hour. Unlike the Asgard of old, this newborn realm lacked towering palaces or elaborate feasting halls. Instead, the survivors erected simple wooden pavilions to provide shelter against sun and occasional rain. Polished stones were arranged in a circle at the field's center, reminiscent of the ancient ring where councils once met. Here, they would decide their collective future. Some might have expected fanfare or a formal procession for the gods' gathering, yet the atmosphere was humble, underscored by a sense of gratitude for mere survival. Men and women, gods and goddesses alike, worked side by side. Modi hefted beams for a communal shelter. Lif assisted in weaving thatch from tall grasses. Magni used Mjolnir's residual sparks to shape nails and hinges. The bustle of cooperative labor filled the air with a pleasant hum. Though no one openly declared Balder their leader, a natural magnetism gathered the community around him. With Odin gone, and Thor, Freyr, Tyr, and Heimdall also departed, Balder seemed the most fitting symbol of hope. He took no throne, nor wore any crown. Instead, he moved among the people, listening to their concerns and gently guiding solutions. If children approached him, some newly born since the apocalypse, he knelt and offered a comforting hand or a kind word, illuminating their faces with shy smiles. If the gods debated farmland distribution or forging new laws, Balder interjected softly, reminding them that mercy and cooperation should reign in this fragile age. Bit by bit, a sense of trust blossomed across Idavöllr. Hödur, too, found acceptance he never dreamed possible. Free from the ghost of Balder's old tragedy, he offered his strengths to the settlement. While blind, his other senses were uncannily sharp, enabling him to detect subtle changes in the environment, shifts in temperature, faint footsteps of approaching animals, the texture of soils best suited for certain crops. People came to rely on Hödur's quiet insights, respecting his presence. At times, children and curious adults would watch as Hödur calmly navigated the open fields with minimal assistance. He seemed attuned to the land's gentle hum, forging an almost mystical connection that counterbalanced his lack of sight. In the evenings, he and Balder would sit by a small hearth, recalling the lessons learned from the old pantheon's downfall, lessons they aimed to weave into the new era. Despite this joyful reunion, questions lingered about other possible survivors, especially Freya. She had always been a pillar of love and fertility among the Vanir, and many believed she might re-emerge in a land so full of new life. Some whispered they felt her presence in the morning dew or the soft petals of flowers. Yet, so far, she remained unseen. Balder encouraged patience. If Freya lived, she would find her way to Idavöllr in time. Others spoke of goddesses like Idun, who had once kept apples granting eternal youth. With the old cycle broken, her fate remained a mystery. Whispers suggested that some lesser gods, or elf lords, might be wandering the far reaches of Alfheim, also restored in the new creation. The notion comforted the weary. There was still more to discover, more friends to find. Within days, the once empty field bristled with communal activity. Families tilled fertile patches, discovering that the soil yielded crops almost miraculously fast. Streams near Idavöllr teemed with fish, ensuring no shortage of fresh food. Scouts returned from short expeditions, reporting an absence of monsters or threats. The world seemed intent on peace, free of the old grudges that fueled endless wars. Finally, the gods and mortals convened in the central ring of stones. Balder, Hödur, Vidar, Vali, Modi, and Magni stood among them. Leif and Lifthrasir represented humanity. Bowing to each other in respect, they declared a new council of guardians for the realm, a fellowship that would maintain harmony and watch over any unforeseen dangers. In the hush that followed, Balder lifted his gaze to the brightening sky. "We have lost so much," he said softly, "fathers, mothers, siblings, entire worlds. Yet we stand here with a chance to begin anew. Let us vow, before each other and the newborn son, that this time the bonds of fellowship will outweigh the seeds of strife." A chorus of assent swept through the gathering. Some closed their eyes, remembering friends and family who had perished. Others raised their fists or their tools, pledging to uphold this peace. For the first time in an age, it felt like the spirit of unity, so elusive in the old pantheon, glimmered with real promise. Thus concluded the assembly on Idavöllr, the sacred plain once ravaged by flame and chaos. They left that meeting with determined hearts, ready to sow the seeds of a civilization built on trust, compassion, and the hard lessons of Ragnarök. A new chapter in the cosmic saga was underway, one guided not by fear or vengeance, but by hope. Chapter 29. Lif and Lifthrasir, the blossoming of humanity. With the covenant of Idaviller inscribed in stone, the new society found stability. Fields expanded, trade routes formed among the settlement, elven enclaves, and even rumored dwarven outposts. At the center of this tapestry, Lif and Lifthrasir emerged as the symbolic parents of humanity, beloved by mortals and respected by gods. In time, Lif bore a child, the firstborn fully in the new world. Mortals rejoiced, understanding this baby marked a milestone for their race's continuation. A naming feast took place under the orchard boughs, with gods attending as honored guests. Freya beamed at the child's healthy aura. Balder offered a blessing to guide the infant's steps on a path of kindness and wisdom. Other families soon followed suit. Houses near Idaviller filled with children's laughter, and the farmland teemed with new workers. The old specter of war faded from mortal memory. These youths grew up hearing only faint legends of monstrous wolves and fiery giants. Instead, they learned about unity, compassion, and the wondrous gifts that emerge from collaboration with gods and elves. Driven by curiosity, mortal children asked endless questions about the old pantheon's tales. Lif and Lifthrasir, with help from the divine, shaped a small school in one of the communal halls. There, elders taught reading and writing, using runes etched into planks, while elves demonstrated illusions and the basics of nature's magic. Physical training blended with ethics. Modi and Magni taught spear techniques, but emphasized using them only for defense. Art blossomed too. It started with simple carvings and clay pots, but soon expanded to murals depicting Balder's return, Idun's golden apples, and the Covenant runestones. Young mortals found inspiration in elven paintings, luminous scenes of cosmic trees and glimmering starlight. At night, gatherings featured songs weaving mortal voices, elven harmonies, and subtle drum beats from Magni's forge. Though the new realm was bountiful, some pockets of scorched earth and hidden toxins still lingered, remnants of Surtur's inferno and Jormungandr's venom. Recognizing that these scars might harm future expansions, Lif and Lifthrasir organized volunteer expeditions to cleanse and restore those areas. With guidance from Freya and Idun, they carried seeds and purified water, planting hardy vegetation to rejuvenate the soil. Elven illusions softened the harsh terrain, encouraging wildlife to return. Vidar and Vali offered their strengths to clear collapsed boulders or petrified logs. Occasionally, a traveler stumbled upon relics, half-buried swords from Ragnarok's final battles, or molten fragments of Asgardian gates. Respectfully, they interred these fragments in memorial cairns, ensuring the new era wouldn't forget the cost of its birth. Human wanderlust grew. Some families, their children grown, decided to migrate further from Idaviller to establish new settlements. They carried seeds, tools forged under Magni's hammer, and a copy of the Covenant. Balder and Hoder blessed them, offering gentle reminders to keep the pillars of unity in their hearts. Freya's blessings ensured that farmland would flourish wherever they settled. In a matter of months, small hamlets arose along rivers or at forest edges. Travelers carried news between these outposts, noting that all thrived. No sign of monstrous threats marred their growth. Deer abounded, wolves remained shy, and even the climate seemed kind, delivering mild rain and gentle sunshine. Despite spreading out, humans maintained close ties to Idaveller's gods. Balder, Hoder, Freya, and the others often visited the new hamlets, walking among mortals without pomp or demands. Sometimes they'd share a simple meal, other times assist with a barn-raising or a harvest festival. The concept of worship morphed into mutual respect. Humanity offered thanks in creative ways, singing, feasting, or dedicating a portion of the harvest to community support rather than homage born of fear. Idun's apples circulated carefully, ensuring each settlement had a small orchard if they wanted it. Mortals learned that while the apples supported health and longevity, reliance on them wasn't necessary for a fulfilling life. Balance became the watchword, a harmonious blend of mortal endurance and subtle divine grace. Though they lived humbly among the people, Leif and Lifthrasir were recognized as a living legend. Young parents sometimes asked them for advice on raising children in a world with newly formed rules. Farmers sought their counsel on best planting practices. No fanfare or throne elevated them, only the people's abiding respect and the gods' open friendship. Over the years, more children graced Leif and Lifthrasir's home. Their family grew, linking hearts with other mortal lineages through marriages. By extension, a wide kinship network spread across the realm. The name Leif's line came to signify a tradition of caretaking, while Lifthrasir's line evoked hardy resilience. Together, they symbolized the unstoppable potential of humanity. As this mortal population multiplied, it also diversified. Some specialized in crafting intricate jewelry from elven-taught methods. Others excelled at music or architecture, building stone bridges reminiscent of dwarven feats. Freed from warfare, each settlement valued creativity and cooperation. In place of old feudal titles, men and women earned esteem by their contributions, whether as healers, farmers, or teachers. Elves sometimes dwelt alongside mortals, forging close bonds and exchanging knowledge. Even dwarves, gradually emerging from secret tunnels, bartered cunningly crafted metal goods for surface-grown foods. A tapestry of peoples formed, weaving a kaleidoscope of talents in a land determined to stay united. Looking over this growing realm, one might see a landscape adorned by sun-kissed fields, winding rivers, orchard groves heavy with shining apples, and the gentle glow of elven lanterns along roads. Gods strolled openly among mortals, not as unapproachable rulers, but as beloved partners in creation. Ruins of old battles lay hidden beneath flowers and tall grass, nearly forgotten by a generation that never knew Ragnarok's horrors firsthand. Leif, on a calm evening, stood with Baldur atop a small hill near Idavollr, watching the setting sun paint the sky in copper and rose hues. She marveled at how quickly life rebounded. "If only the old gods could see this," she whispered. "Perhaps they do in some way." Baldur smiled, sorrow touching his eyes. They sacrificed themselves so this might be possible. Perhaps that was always the purpose. From their ashes grew this harmony. And so chapter 29 concluded on a note of gentle wonder. Humanity thrived under the nurturing gaze of a small yet dedicated pantheon, forging settlements full of laughter and crafts. No tyrants or wars haunted their horizon, only the promise of more knowledge, more creation, and more love. The blossoming was real, and it belonged to everyone who cherished life. Chapter 30. Epilogue, a new golden age. Generations passed. A child born under Baldur's first blessing grew old, yet remained vigorous, thanks to Idun's apples and a life of honest labor. Towns and villages spanned hillsides, each abiding by the covenant of Idavollr: harmony, stewardship, honesty, and mercy. Elves lived side by side with mortals, and dwarves occasionally surfaced to trade or co-build wonders. Those who roamed the land rarely encountered hostility beyond the occasional predator, which was swiftly managed without needless cruelty. No monstrous beings threatened the blossoming civilization. Fenrir, Jörmungandr, Surtur, and others were but half-remembered nightmares from a distant age. Instead, travelers found welcoming homes offering shared meals and stories, forging bonds that transcended race or realm. The population grew in measured harmony with nature, carefully stewarding forests and farmland, never taking more than the earth could replenish. Freya's gentle presence often guided them, while Baldur's warmth reminded them of the preciousness of each new day. Where once enormous temples or fortresses might have dominated the skyline, now modest communal halls and orchard groves defined every settlement's heart. Each year, around midsummer, people convened at Idavöllr for the Festival of Renewal, a tradition celebrating the realm's founding and the fallen gods whose sacrifices made it possible. Families brought fresh produce, baked goods and artworks, exchanging them as gifts with strangers who quickly became friends. Elves performed illusions that depicted the cycle of destruction and rebirth, mesmerizing children who squealed in delight at the swirling lights. During the festival, the runestones glowed softly, as if acknowledging the living vow that thrived around them. Priests and priestesses, of no single dogma but many devotions, led gentle rituals. They poured pure water over the stones, reciting words of thanks for the land's bounty. A hush always followed, a reverent stillness in which participants silently connected with the memories of Odin, Thor, and the old pantheon. Without warfare consuming resources, society channeled energies into creativity and learning. Blacksmithing evolved into an art form, as dwarves and mortals refined metalwork that combined practicality with elven aesthetics. Architecture blossomed, stone arches, glass-like windows, thanks to dwarven-engineered furnaces, and living roofs of entwined vines. Elven illusions merged with mortal invention to create glowing signposts on trade routes, guiding travelers safely by night. Scholarly enclaves formed, studying runic mysteries, charting the stars visible under the new sun and moon, or experimenting with small wonders of magic harnessed for daily convenience, like self-warming hearthstones or orchard sprinklers that shimmered with dew. Baldur, Hödur, Freya, Idun, Vidar, Vali, Modi, and Magni. Each found roles in this golden age. They didn't demand worship or tributes, but people naturally gravitated toward them for guidance or wisdom. Baldur symbolized compassion, ensuring disputes remained dialogues rather than conflicts. Hödur guided those who navigated darkness or uncertainty, championing the power of inner perception. Freya blessed fertility, love, and the arts, nurturing crops and hearts alike. Idun maintained orchards of golden apples, sharing them freely to ensure long, healthy lives. Vidar and Vali safeguarded exploration and justice, responding if any emergent threat or wrongdoing appeared. Modi and Magni taught martial skill as a discipline of self-improvement, ensuring the realm could defend itself without aggression. Each deity walked among the people, forging friendships across generations. Some rumored that these gods still possessed longer lifespans, but they aged gracefully, embodying the realm's spirit rather than dominating it. Their presence served as living reminders that divine power need not overshadow mortal effort. Over time, mortal leaders emerged, wise elders, skilled crafters, or charismatic teachers who presided over day-to-day matters. Whenever disputes arose that required more than local mediation, a traveling council formed, referencing the runes at Idavöllr. This system was fluid yet stable, shaped by consensus rather than conquest. Lif and Lifthrasir, revered as the earliest forebears, eventually grew old. Surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, they saw their lineage spread far and wide. Their final years passed peacefully in a hillside cottage overlooking fields that once were barren. On their last day, gentle sunlight bathed them, and Baldur himself visited, offering a quiet farewell. Legends say they passed in their sleep hand in hand, the sweetest expression of unity. As the centuries rolled on, the realm's prosperity only deepened. Elves constructed ephemeral towers of woven light in forest glades, open for mortals to visit. dwarves built subterranean canals that carried water to remote farmland. Occasional discontent appeared. No civilization is perfect, but the covenant's pillars gave them a path for reconciliation. In every settlement, a carved runestone with the 4 pillars welcomed newcomers: harmony, stewardship, honesty, mercy. Children learned these words as soon as they could speak. Traveling bards sang epic ballads of Ragnarok, not to glorify war, but to underscore how precious peace could be. On a luminous evening, centuries after the cataclysm, a band of young explorers climbed a tall hill. One lass carried a staff topped with a glowing crystal. Beside her walked an elven youth, illusions dancing around his fingertips. With them strode a sturdy dwarf, sporting a metal pack of alchemical tools, and a mortal boy with a well-worn bow. Reaching the summit, they looked out upon valleys sprinkled with lights from villages, farmland, and orchard groves. Rivers glimmered in the moonlight, and distant torches outlined caravans traveling peacefully between settlements. "It's beautiful," the mortal boy whispered, chest tight with wonder. The elf nodded, illusions briefly forming silhouettes of the old gods battling giants, then replaced by an image of the covenant runestones shining under a bright sun. The dwarf set down his pack, gazing at the star-strewn sky. "We might uncover more secrets. The world feels endless." The lass with the staff simply smiled. "We have the pillars to guide us. I can't wait to see what we build next." In that moment, the cosmic tapestry soared overhead, unblemished by storms of war or monstrous shadows. The watchers might sense the faintest echo of Odin's wisdom or Thor's thunder, not as looming forces, but as gentle echoes guiding them forward. Far below, Idavolar's runestones glowed softly, witness to an age of peace that had surpassed even the grandest myths. So ended the tale of Ragnarok and the realm reborn from its ashes, a story shaped by heartbreak and heroism, culminating in a golden age defined by empathy, cooperation, and the joyful mingling of divine grace with mortal ambition. The cycle was complete, yet open-ended, for creation endures when nurtured by love. And in that quiet, starry night, the world breathed in perfect unison. Gods, mortals, elves, dwarves, all weaving a symphony of life that promised to echo through eternity.